Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to look at what if Naruto became Orochimaru's student as a child. Movie.
And if you want more movie like this, please leave a like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. What happened? The Sandaime Hokage asked as he marched through the white halls of the Konoha hospital. Unknown. Inu replied. He slept as usual, woke up, marched to the bathroom, then he started screaming. The legendary shinobi shot off question after question as he walked, barely waiting for the response to be over before launching into his next one. Genjutsu? None that I could detect? Poisons? Hallucinogens? Initial results are negative. More thorough testing is being conducted as we speak. Hokage-sama. Current status. The seal's integrity? Stable as far as we can tell, on both counts, though we've called in the expert in order to verify. The old monkey nodded, about to ask another question before he heard the sound of a struggle. His and Inu's heads jerked up ever so slightly before they were both rushing down the hallway, the Anbu's sword emerging from its scabbard with a glint of polished steel. The door was thrown open to reveal two nurses, a doctor and four Anbu lined up in front of them, forming a semicircle around a blonde child clutching a surgical blade to his chest. What happened? Hiruzen questioned, his voice unchanged from its usual calm tone. He woke up and started struggling. Hokage-sama. One of the Anbu answered. He took Dr. Koku's scalpel from his coat pocket. Cut me good when I tried to grab him too. Another Anbu, a younger one, said, showing off the blood-drenched glove on his left hand, an open gash in his palm. He's fast. Old man. The Jinchuriki's frightened voice brought Saru's eyes to him, the soft brown orbs softening their placid look to one of mild concern. He stepped forward, past the line of people to get in close to the boy before he knelt in front of him. Naruto-chan. He cooed at the 4-year-old holding out his hand. Naruto-chan, come here. The boy's white-knuckled grip on the surgical knife tightened even further, and for a brief instant he thought the child might actually try to strike out at him. Then the boy launched himself forward with a hysterical cry, hugging the Sandaime so fiercely Sarutobi could actually feel his robe ready to tear as the toddler cried into his chest, babbling nonsense he couldn't understand. Only one thing stood out. They're gone. They're all gone. Who they were and where they could have gone, the Hokage didn't hold the foggiest notion. Picking up the boy, he whispered softly, trying to calm him as he stared straight at Inu, his top Anbu already taking up the assignment as he signaled orders to his men. Naruto's apartment and habitual locations would be searched thoroughly for any clues that could be found. Waving the doctor away, Sarutobi commandeered a stiff-backed chair, settling himself down with Naruto still crying all over him. The Sandaime took a breath, letting himself sigh as he waited for the boy's hysterics to calm. He shouldn't have been surprised when Naruto's sniffles finally faded into restless sleep, the boy's features scrunched up in discomfort. He considered waking him, but in the end decided it'd be best to simply ask the boy tomorrow. He doubted he'd just forget. Suddenly the door opened, revealing Sarutobi's old student, bringing a weary smile to the aging Kage's face. Is he all right? The Sannin asked, stepping into the room and plucking the child out of Sarutobi's arms to place him on the bed, hands raising his shirt to find the seal on his navel. Physically he's fine. But as for what happened to trigger these emotions, we cannot say. Sarutobi admitted. Half of me is starting to think this was just one very vivid nightmare, perhaps I should call. This was no nightmare, his student flatly interrupted. That turned Sarutobi's face into hard, chiseled stone. All laxity vanishing at the man's voice. What's wrong? The seal's empty. The Kyuubi's gone. It was 20 minutes later that Sarutobi found himself marching into the bowels of Konoha's interrogation department. Naruto lay blissfully asleep, wheeled through on a hospital bed, kept unconscious by influence of a genjutsu. This day had gone from routine, to worrying, to downright terrifying, and he needed answers, and he needed them now. Out of a side hallway, Inoichi, half delirious, still waking from whatever sleep his men had dragged him out of, stumbled into view, still visibly trying to get his bearings before Sarutobi grabbed him by the shoulder and all but shoved him towards the direction they were walking. Prepare yourself for a mind walk. The Hokage demanded brusquely. I need to know what he's done. I need to know where he's been, who he's been with, what he's been eating, right down to how many times the boys breathed today. Inoichi. Knowing better than to argue, the Yamanaka clan head simply nodded, following the group in his sleepwear. By the time they reached the chamber, Inoichi was fully awake, barely even taking his place at the foot of the bed before he formed his hand seals. 3 seconds later his eyes opened, a bewildered expression decorating his face. What's wrong? His brain. The elder Yamanaka actually seemed to be struggling to find the words, twisted. What exactly does that mean? It's like. Pretend his mind is a stick, straight and thin, you follow it in one direction and leave in one direction. Now toss 100 other sticks that look and feel the same but with subtle differences, on top of it, group them together, mix them up and now try to find the exact same stick you had originally. It'll be near impossible. What could do that? I have no idea. Then get an idea. I have a continent's worth of suspects right now and I need that list narrowed. So either think of something or walk in there and find out what happened. I can't do a mind walk like this. I follow the memories then follow them back. Trying to go in here I'd risk just trailing off the path, so to speak, in either going forward or coming back. It could lead to false information, me getting stuck in his subconscious psyche for far longer than would be healthy for either of us. And that's just the better outcomes of a botched mind walk. Whoever you're looking for evidently knows enough about Yamanaka clan techniques to devise this pretty ingenious counter. It's as though someone fabricated an entirely new psyche and drove it into his skull. My suggestion is to look through any records you have regarding people that know mind manipulation techniques. And pray it's not something someone came up with on their own. The professor all but hissed before turning to look at the Anbu to his left. Tell Inu to widen his search parameters to include long-term village residents. This could be a domestic case where someone found access to the Yamanaka clan scrolls. Inoichi gulped, catching the Hokage's eye but not daring to say a single thing. The message was clear. His clan was now under heavy scrutiny as well. If something didn't fall into its place in the investigation, well, he didn't really want to think about that. Just then another of the Anbu had the courtesy to step into the room in full view before approaching the Hokage. Sir, we've discovered something. Speak. The village barrier teams reported an anomaly. Their most sensitive sensor Nin could feel it for an instant. They couldn't identify what it was but. Investigate further. Cross-reference with patrol groups of Chunin, see if anyone reported anything odd last night. At once. Hokage-sama. Inoichi stepped forward. We should tread very carefully with Uzumaki-san. If I'm right and this new fabrication of memories is right on top of his old ones, he could be very confused when he wakes up. That would explain why he attacked one of my Anbu, the Sandame hummed. Soon enough his real memories should prove more formidable than these new fabrications, but until then his behavior might be a little erratic. I suggest when he wakes up you be there, along with some familiar faces if possible. The aging Hokage nodded. I'll see to it, Inoichi. The cage is empty. The massive bars that had loomed over him years ago when he first stepped foot into this place, still stand. Only they hold vigil over a hollow. There is nothing within. There is only the churning water beneath his feet, the echoes of its sound bouncing off the cold walls. He cannot see Kurama. He cannot hear him. He can't even feel an echo of his presence. His friend is gone without so much as a footprint to have ever indicated he was here. When Naruto opened his eyes, the sun was already high in the sky, the light filtering in from the outside world. He pushed himself up to a sitting position, groaning at the stiff soreness in his joints and muscles, rubbing at puffy, tear-crusted eyes as his thoughts tried to organize themselves. He looked down at his two small hands, looked at this room that just seemed too big. He was here, he was alive and he was here, and they were all gone. Why hadn't they told him? Why? He could have tried to push the channeling seals more, refined the displacement matrix, tried to integrate some kind of chakra storage seal into the design. He could have done something. Why didn't they fucking tell him? His hands clenched into tight fists. A white-knuckled grip as his fingers clench so hard his nails threatened to break the skin. But only threaten. He can't even do that anymore. He sobs, the fury and strength leached out of him, leaving only despair. Not even Kurama. And now he's here, alone again. There's a hand grasping his and Naruto jerks, startled to realize someone had snuck up on him. It had been a while since people could do that. He looks up, expecting to see a nurse only to find a surprising face. Ba-chan. Tsunade, as young and beautiful as ever, frowned. What happened to Tsunade ne Naru-chan? Naruto blinked, confused. He'd never known Tsunade when he was a kid. Did he? The blonde woman's lips pursed. These memory issues must be pretty bad, she muttered to herself before sitting down on the bed at his feet. What do you remember about me, kiddo? She asked even as her hands glowed with that familiar scanning technique as she hovered her hands over him. You're Tsunade ba. Nay. She nodded, chocolate orbs observing him carefully. And you? He paused, noticing something. Hey, where's your necklace? The slug Sanin blinked. My what now? Your necklace. That green jewel. The Shodem's necklace, where is it? I don't have it, so you should. Naruto, that necklace belongs to Dan. You've seen him wearing it forever.
Naruto felt himself reeling, straightening on the bed as he stared at her. That Dan guy's alive.
Now it was Tsunade whose face seemed to go slack with shock. That Dan. Naruto, he took you and Shizune to see Koyuki Kazana's latest movie last week. The two sat in mutual disbelief for a moment before Tsunade huffed, resuming her scan. When they find whoever screwed with Yukito, they better give me 10 good minutes alone with him. Naruto sat confused and bewildered. Now he knew something was wrong. Even if Tsunade hadn't left until after he was born, something he highly doubted, and they simply hadn't met before, there was no way that Dangai should still be alive right now. His mind wandered back, trying to recall all that was said when they were designing the seal. Wishing, not for the last time, that he could have someone smarter than him that he could talk with. They were supposed to be a team. Could things have changed? Sasuke, Sakura and he spent months talking about all the changes any misstep could bring. But their discussions had only been about changes after the point of their arrival, not before. But could just them coming back in the first place, by itself, change things? It was unnatural. Something like this had never happened before, so trying to theorize about its effects had been something akin to shooting at the sky praying to hit something on the way down. It had been a miracle they got as close as they did. If things had changed, how many? How far? How drastic? How the hell could he prepare for Tobi or Obito or whatever the hell he called himself without his friends? Without Kurama? And without even the goddamn security of at least having an idea about what could happen? Naruto. He came back to the waking world with Tsunade hovering over him, his heart pounding in his chest and blood rushing through his ears, the gentle eddies of her healing chakra washing over his small body. What the hell is wrong with you? I have to get out of here, he said, moving to sit up again when Tsunade's hand shoved him back down. You're a 4-year-old kid who all but had a panic attack not 2 feet away from me. You're not going anywhere until you explain what you're thinking about right now. He let out a laugh, a quick bubble of hysteria that threatened to keep going before he reined it in. Explain? Oh yeah, he'll get right on that. Just give him 12 years to get back to the point they've got to do this again and he'll jot down all his notes for her. He laughed a little more. Tsunade's face showed genuine concern. Come on kid, stop. You're really scaring me now. That sobered him up, but the lack of illogical euphoria left him only with the crushing anxiety of this whole debacle. I'm sorry, Ba. Ne-chan. We've found nothing. That's not like you, Inu. Do you need another 24 hours? There is nothing, Hokage-sama. Inu assured. He spoke to no one unusual. The toxicology reports came back negative. Hyuga have looked over his chakra network to check for any recent manipulations. All visitors within the last week have checked out. Everyone he spoke to checked out. The only lead we have to go on is that minor barrier fluctuation, and no one in the Corps knows what that could be. I cannot ask you to stop searching. I understand. I'm just informing you that at this stage, the likelihood of us finding anything is nearly negligible. Just do everything possible. Leave nothing unturned. In the meantime, I want you to devote yourself and your best Anbu to guard Naruto at all times until further notice. You work in shifts. The rest of your men will hunt down a list of all possible mind manipulators outside of Konoha. Someone on this continent knows something. Understood. Inu vanished in a swirl of leaves. You're pushing him hard. The Sandame's second and remaining student commented with a grin as he stepped out of a nearby wall with a smirk.
Sarutobi kept walking, approaching the door. There has to be an explanation. If not, they managed to infiltrate every layer of our village defenses completely undetected. Even I would have trouble to do something like that, and I designed the system. Her eyes moved to the door for a second, and it was enough to warn Naruto that someone else was coming a second before the door opened. Not they managed to infiltrate every layer of our village defenses completely undetected. Even I would have trouble to do something like that, and I designed the system, the Sandame said to someone before stepping into the room, smiling gently at the boy on the bed. Naruto-chan. Naruto smiled, genuine relief filling his face at something wholly familiar and long missed. Gigi. Then the smile dropped from his face, the fear gripping him as the unmistakable form of the snake Sanin stepped through the doorways, a gentle little smile tugging at his own features. Hello, Naruto-kun. It didn't take Inoichi to see the sudden tension that gripped the boy, and it was Tsunade that spoke. Naruto. You remember Oro-kun, don't you? Naruto licked his lips, swallowing as he nodded, still glaring at the man. I do. Tsunade frowned, turning to look over her shoulder. These memory issues seem to range, and whoever did this was really good. Other than his hostility to me, what other odd behavior has he shown? The snake Sanin questioned, crossing his arms with one hand on his chin, curious. He thought Dan was dead, seems to have completely forgotten about him, like he never even existed for the last 4 years. That made the snake Sanin raise a slender eyebrow. Tsunade nodded. My reaction too. The only one whose memory seems to be unaltered is Sensei. Even that might not be true on further inquiry. Be glad, Sensei.
Your enemies haven't stooped so low as to turn the aggression of a toddler on you. Sarutobi gave a short chuckle from somewhere in his throat. Okay, look. Naruto said, scratching at his head in frustration. I remember Ero Sennin, so let's just bring him here too. Ero who now? Tsunade glared. Jiraiya. Immediately, Naruto knew something was wrong. All three of the room's occupants went stiff with shock. Tsunade went pale and even Orochimaru seemed as though he'd just been sucker punched. Naruto. Sarutobi began, choking on the words. Jiraiya's been dead for almost 20 years. He was dead. Dead, killing Hattori Hanzo, the true shinobi of AIM and the last Toad Sage, cut each other down in the final days of the last Great War. He'd asked how, but neither Tsunade nor Orochi seemed to be willing to cough up information. So he'd gone to the library hoping to find something on public record. He found very little. The bare bones of a romanticized account that depicted the old pervert fighting Hanzo to the end in order to defend his injured teammates. In the end they managed to kill each other. If he didn't know any better he'd say the old bastard wrote it himself. He sniffed, closing the book with a snap before pushing it aside. Shinobi records were sealed. And public records sucked. They didn't say how he died. What techniques were used. They didn't even say where the man was buried. He pulled closer another book, this one on history. He needed to find out just how many things stayed the same and how far this ripple effect thing went.
Jiraiya, calm down. You fucking calm down, she screeched, still pacing the length of the Sarutobi's office. Someone stuck. They, how the hell did they?
Just shut up. The snake Sanin barked, his own agitation shining through. Let's stop and think before you bust down 10 walls with no purpose and actually make use of this. Indeed. Sarutobi agreed, stepping into his office, a file under his arm. Naruto-chan's revelation narrows down our list of suspects considerably. Anyone who was close enough to Jiraiya to know his personality and appearance, the snake surmised. Exactly. He opened the file as he sat down. That almost certainly means a domestic enemy. We'll look into it, Tsunade assured, her clenched fists cracking as she tightened her grip. Saru would pity whomever they eventually tracked down, if he didn't feel exactly the same way. To use Jiraiya to twist a boy's memories and simultaneously betray the village. This person, whoever he or she was, had gained 3 very powerful enemies. I'll be making some inquiries into my spies from AIM in the meanwhile. Orochimaru nodded. Many of their countrymen still hold a great hatred for what Jiraiya did and could have strove to do something like this. Do it. Even if you run a dead end, we've been too lax on AIM's activities recently. We need more intel. Either way, I'll make my next statement to both of you. In your mutual investigations, do not forget about Naruto himself. He'll need our help after what he's experienced, and I can't be there as often as I'd like. You two were always close with him. Have faith that he'll remember that soon. Tsunade nodded. Yeah. I'll bring Dan to see him when he gets back, maybe that'll jog something. Orochimaru smirked. He might throw one of his toy kunai at me if I get too close. Getting scared of a toddler, Oro-kun? The female in the room laughed. Terrified, he quipped, smiling for a moment before becoming serious again. Don't worry, sensei, the boy's strong for his age. He'll be fine. In a few days he'll be right back to normal. I hope so. The old monkey confessed as he lit his pipe, then he waved them both away. Go. You have your orders. Taiko. Inu's head turned ever so slightly, finding the new arrival through the slit eyeholes of his mask. You're here early. Before I assume my duties, it would be best if I were fully briefed on the situation, she said, kneeling beside him, assuming a perch on the tall library bookshelf to look down at the 4-year-old child. He's suffering memory issues, and we might be seeing the first ramifications of it. How so? She asked. When was the last time you saw a 4-year-old reading through history books in the library? Furthermore, he's comprehending. Evidently, the experience of these false memories might have given him an increased intelligence. Our experiences shape us, she affirmed. Adding experiences, even false ones, must have affected him. Inu nodded, then leaned a little forward. Looks like he found something that doesn't really match up with what he knew. The blonde boy picked up the heavy book, struggling with its weight as he all but ran towards the librarian's desk. Is this right? Naruto all but shouted, pushing the book up onto the desk, startling the elderly man sitting by piece of furniture. The older man blinked, pushing his thick reading glasses onto the bridge of his nose, leaning forward and taking the book in hand. Which part, young man? Naruto marched around the desk, pushing through the swiveling doors to stand next to the man as he brought the book down to his eye level. He pointed a little finger, pressing it against a paragraph. This part right here. The man brought the book close to his face, reading over the identified paragraph. After a moment the man nodded. Yes, it is. What seems to be the problem? Naruto swallowed, smiling after a moment as he held out his hand to take back the book. Nothing. Just wanted to make sure. The old man nodded, handing the book back. Inu's head tilted. Wonder what he found that's so interesting. The woman beside him shrugged. We can find out later. He nodded, his body beginning to vanish into wisps of smoke. I'll leave to get some rest, be seeing you. She set herself onto a more comfortable position, watching as the little blonde sat down once again in his previous seat. Naruto meanwhile smiled as he sat down, reading over the paragraph once again just for that smile to stay on his face. It was Hashirama Senju and Uchiha Madara that founded Konoha, allying the powerful Senju and Uchiha clans and uniting the clans that were based around the continent's central region. While their respective Mokudan and Sharingan bloodlines were extremely powerful, it does not appear at this time that any of their descendants have inherited their Kage Genkai. An Uchiha clan without the Sharingan? It was no guarantee Tobi hadn't manifested the thing or stolen it, but this had the potential to make things far less complicated. He kept on reading. It was night when he finally stepped out of the library's halls, shivering in the cold evening air, regretting the fact that he hadn't brought a jacket with him. Suddenly he felt a weight settle on his shoulders, stumbling forward a little as it settled before he looked to see someone had placed a thick, orange coat over his shoulders. He looked to thank whoever it was when the words died on his lips, replaced by a frown and a glare. Orochimaru raised a slender eyebrow. Should I assume you don't like this coat anymore? He asked, a note of glibness in his tone. What are you doing here? When I heard you were out here without a coat, I was behooved to bring one to you. Naruto blinked. Behooved by who? Tsunade, of course. He pointed and Naruto turned to look, finding a slug resting on the branch of a nearby tree. She's busy at the hospital or she would have come herself. He commented. Come. I'll walk you home and you can answer some of my questions. One of which being how you know what behoove means. No thanks. Naruto said, turning to walk the long way home. Snakes slithered around his waist, coiling tightly and lifting, leaving his little legs dangling in the air. I insist, let's talk you and I. The snake drawled, pulling him up to his side as he marched down the road. The youth struggled, hands pulling and pushing at the snakes, but with the limbs of a 4-year-old he might as well have been trying to bend steel. So what did they stick in your head that's gotten you so riled up about me, Naruto-kun? He asked as though commenting on the encroaching winter. You're a creepy bastard, that's what. Let me out of this. Evidently they also taught you some more colorful words to go along with behooved to your limited repertoire. Alright then. Let's not talk about me. What fabrications did they stick in your head about Jiraiya? What's it matter to you anyway? Naruto glowered, arms crossed now, having given up on freeing himself. Don't pretend like you gave a daw. Orochimaru stopped, standing still in the road as he turned to look at Naruto, the serpentine yellow eyes boring a hole into the boy's skull. Naruto-kun. You're young and confused. You can count that as your saving grace or you'd be in a great deal of pain right now. The blonde met the serpent's gaze, blinking in curious bewilderment. Orochimaru turned and kept on walking, waiting for a moment before speaking again. Now tell me, what was it they stuck in that head of yours about Jiraiya? Naruto looked down, considering whether he should answer or not. Finally, he did speak. Ero Sennin was always peeping on girls in the hot springs. Huh. The snake barked out a laugh. That does sound like him. What did he look like in these memories of yours? Big, taller than anyone else in the village, except maybe Choji's dad. Choji? Akamichi. White hair that he could make into a personal shield. Dressed up like a kabuki, wood sandals and everything. A smirk graced the pale man's face, one born of seemingly fond remembrance. He was also the first one that taught me the water walking and summoning. Orochimaru stopped again, turning to look at him. Taught you? You learned how to manipulate chakra? That made Naruto pause, hesitating for a moment before his mind came to a hasty decision, a quick plan forming in his head as he deduced where this could lead. Yeah. The snake set him down, uncoiling from his waist. Show me. The man demanded. With a thought, Naruto pushed Chakra to his feet. Seeing that her charge was in the safe hands of Konoha's snake summoner, the young woman that had been tailing them pulled away, doubling back towards the librarian who was beginning to gather his things as she approached, making as much noise as possible so as to not give the man a heart attack. When he looked up, he was visibly startled to see one of Konoha's normally unseen special operators standing in front of him. The boy who was here. He asked you about a book. What was he inquiring about? Naruto struggled to focus, his underdeveloped coils trying to adapt to this new strain he was putting on them. He raised up his foot, about to place it on the wall before the Sanin's voice stopped him. You're using too much. This is what I always used, he protested, putting his foot down. Your memories are on the right track, but your body doesn't know what it's doing. He shot back, placing a hand on his chin. Still, this is interesting. You mentioned summoning. Show me the seals. And Naruto formed them, watching Orochimaru's curious face as he did. The Sanin knelt, getting himself at eye level with the youth, pulling out a kunai from his pouch and offering it hilt first. How well can you throw one of these? Naruto grinned, and Orochimaru could tell it was false. The boy was manipulating him. Or trying to. Failing miserably, but the effort was there. How about you and I make a deal? He asked. The snake raised a slender eyebrow. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. It was the next morning that Sarutobi found himself in his office, reading over a series of files discussing a zoning dispute between the Hyuga and the Akamichi clans, when the door to his office opened, revealing his pale-skinned student.
Orochimaru, what can I do for you? Not mincing words, the man smirked in that familiar way of his. I'm here to nominate Uzumaki Naruto for early academy enrollment.
Officially, nominating a child for early academy enrollment was not, in truth, that big of a deal.
The child had been discovered to possess a high degree of proficiency or raw talent in one or various shinobi arts, and, as a military state, the village policy was to hone these abilities early so as not to let them go to waste or be lost due to a normal civilian life being unable to nurse these prodigious talents adequately. Unofficially, Naruto was discovering, it was like painting a neon sign over the kid's head. He should have guessed, really. The two people he knew about from his time period that had gotten an early nomination were Kakashi-sensei and Itachi, and both were comparable monsters when measured against the run-of-the-mill shinobi. It wasn't done often. Not only was it difficult to find a child with actual talent beyond mere hopes and dreams, but the person that nominated them risked a lot of his own reputation, prestige. If the nominee turned out to be average or worse yet, subpar, or even injured in the tests of the academy, then that person was branded, at the bare minimum, reckless. Both Itachi and Kakashi had been nominated by members of their own families. But he, the resident Jinchuriki, being nominated by the recluse, that was the Snake Sanin, had come, as far as most could tell, completely out of left field and made a lot of civilians and quite a few shinobi curious, and rumors were already starting to float around. None of which were true. Naruto wouldn't trust that serpent as far as he could throw him, which in his present state wasn't very far at all. The only reason he'd chosen him over the others was because, well, he was there. And now he was in a rush. He had to start climbing the shinobi ladder early. The higher his rank, the more techniques he'd have access to, the more doors he'd be able to open, the more clearance he'd have. More clearance meant more information, and he needed information. That was the key to finding Tobi. He only knew the vaguest of Toba's acts before the war had broken out. It hadn't mattered to him where the hell the Uchiha had come from, only what he could do to stop him. And by the time their little plan of going back in time saw itself pushed from the aspect of pipe dream to necessity, anyone that could have possibly answered such questions were long since dead or enemies, or both. And more than that, he needed to get to Tobi before he managed to achieve the insane level of strength he'd gotten during the war. He needed to warn the Jinchuriki about him. Him and maybe Akatsuki too, if they still existed. He finished off his breakfast, tossing the dish in the sink, promising to clean it out later before he made for the door, ready to leave when he heard a knock. He paused, blinking, wondering who it would be as he reached for the kunai and shuriken pouches to strap them on. They'd been given to him, courtesy of Sarutobi. Be right there, old man. The door opened, no doubt picked with chakra. I'm not that old, kiddo. The voice was unfamiliar, and Naruto quickly looked up, finding a smiling silver-haired man. Who are you? The man's face fell. Whoa, Su-chan warned me, but that's a real kick to the gut, kiddo. It's me, Dan. Naruto blinked. So this the one Tsunade had been so hung up on. I thought you'd be taller. The blonde found himself saying before thinking. Me too. He shot back with an easy grin. But alas, humans don't grow on hopes and dreams. Which reminds me, have you been eating fruits and vegetables like Su-chan told you last time we were here? I guess. Quote. You have that refrigerator stuffed with ramen, don't you? There's cereal in there. He defended. Dan walked him to the academy. It was a novel experience. And no, that wasn't a euphemism. It was actually a novel experience. He'd never had someone walk him to the academy grounds. The Hokage occasionally saw him before he left his apartment when he could spare the time, but those times were few and far between, and even then he had to head to the tower, not to the academy, which was a bit out of the way from his destination, so having someone walk him the whole way there was a real change of pace. And the company was actually nice to boot. It didn't take him long to realize Dan was a joker, he always had a ready comeback or witty comment. It kinda reminded him of Jiraiya. Though Ero-sen intended to be more dry sarcasm than witty quips. "Ah, my two princesses," the silver-haired man said, drawing Naruto's attention enough for him to find Tsunade and a much younger Shizune. "But I really am sick." "Oh, bull to the shit." The slug princess shot back. "You just don't wanna go on the first day. We never do anything on the first day. You get to say hi to all those wonderful people you'll be spending the rest of the year with. I say hi to them all the time anyway. It's not like we can lose each other inside this village. You get to say hi to the teachers then. I don't want to say hi to the teachers. That's half the objective here. Tough luck then." Huh. He didn't remember Shizune Nichan talking back to Tsunade. Ever, even when she deserved it. Now Shi-chan. You wouldn't want to leave Naruto here alone on his first day, would you? What about all those voracious little aspiring kunoichi he'll have to contend with? Dan's voice announced their arrival to Shizune, who turned around with a smirk for both of them. "Hey Uncle Dan. Hi Naru-chan." Her smile fell a bit when she noticed his sad face. "Huh, what's wrong?" Naruto blinked for a moment, staring at her face, and struggled in those seconds to push away the memory of her eyes open in death, of red blood staining her pale skin. At those same eyes staring back at him from the opposite side of a battlefield. He smiled as brightly as he could, greeting this expression like an old friend, one he hadn't seen or needed in a long time. "Hey Shizune Nichan." He stepped forward and hugged her, barely reaching her waist as she patted his hair. A lump formed in his throat at the familiar gesture.
"Those kunoichi will have to deal with me before Shizune gets a crack at them." He heard Tsunade vow, and heard the swat of her hand against Dan's arm. "And don't you go sticking ideas in his head either." The man chuckled. Naruto let go of Shizune before the hug became awkward, looking up at the building. Was Iruka-sensei here yet? Or was that not going to happen at all? It had been so long since he'd come around here. It had been so long since this place was around to come to. He felt a hand on his shoulder, turning to see Tsunade standing beside him, a serious frown on her face. "You okay, kiddo?" Once more. He smiled. "Yeah. Just nervous." Tsunade's frown grew a little deeper. "You can wait, you know. I'll talk things over with Oro-kun and—" "No," he interrupted, his voice pitching with the high notes of a 4-year-old. "No, I can do it." "We know you can." This voice was familiar, and as far as he was concerned, still unwelcome. The whole group turned to find Orochimaru standing not 5 feet away, seemingly conjuring himself from thin air, smiling with that serpentine upturn of his lips. "Have a little faith, Su-chan." He drawled. "I wouldn't have nominated little Naru-chan if I didn't know he could handle it." "He might be able to handle it, but that doesn't mean he needs to. He's 4. And Naruto could tell as the Sannin shrugged that this was simply retracing the steps of an argument the two had held previously. They were Sannin. So neither of them would budge, one way or the other. Orochimaru looked to him, his smirk becoming a little wider. "True, but it is his choice and you and I can both see that he'll choose to go. Every time." Shizune wasn't in his class. He wasn't surprised. It was a 4-year program. Children entered when they were 6 or 8, took on the program for 4 years, graduated and became genin. Shizune was on her last semester. He'd gotten in when he was 6, being an orphan with no income outside of village-funded programs and a trust fund left to the Hokage. He'd been eligible for the early enrollment. It was a village hashtag to give orphan children the head start of becoming shinobi and getting paid as early as possible, a surefire way to keep themselves from starving. In reality, it was the easiest source of new recruits considering how many orphans a military village had. He'd failed the graduation exam twice and managed to get in on his 3rd, which is why his classmates and genin team had been with people his own age.
This time he was starting absurdly early. The only person that had managed to get in this early was Hitaki Kakashi, and he was so good he'd managed to graduate in a single year. Getting on a team at age 5. From what he could recall, the only one that could match that was Itachi, and even he had gotten in at age 6 and graduated at age 7. Hopefully, he'd be able to match Kakashi's little feat. The way he saw it, if he could graduate by 5, become a genin, he could be a chunin as early as 6 years old, and start training for the Junin trials to take them at 8 or 9. With that rank it would be enough to wiggle himself into some of the village vaults to get access to techniques that would let him join the Hunter Nin squad by the time he hit 12, which is when things should start kicking into the proverbial high gear. The Hunter Nins were the elite of the elite. The best any village had to offer. They were the ninja, meant to kill other ninja on a daily basis. Konoha, at the height of its power, held somewhere around 100 genin,
350 to 500 chunin, about 150 to 200 junin and 70 to 100 anbu, but they only ever had 20 hunter ninja. The reason for this was twofold. Firstly, because they were just that strong, and secondly, because a hunter ninja's loyalty must be absolutely beyond question. Given that they had to go on the most high-risk missions, tracking down and killing other ninja, some of these A or even S-class targets to bring in that money to the village coffers when they killed ninja from other villages that had posted the bounty, these ninja could be, and were in fact authorized to be gone for months at a time. Which would suit him perfectly. With this plan, he wouldn't meet his friends. Not until much later at any rate, as it was he was staying as far away from Sasuke and Sakura as possible. Avoiding anything that might change them, he wanted them as close to what they were as he could get. So he wouldn't meet them, any of them, but he had to do this. The kind of freedom the hunter nin enjoyed was exactly what he needed to contact all the other Jinchuriki, get a bead on Akatsuki and kill Tobi. This was the plan. Now he just had to make it happen. Alright kids, settle down. The teacher marched in, an older man with a salt and pepper hair and beard that kinda reminded him of Asuma sensei's, only it went around his mouth too. Some of you may notice we've gotten a new student. I'd like you all to give a warm welcome to Naruto-san here. He'll be with us for the next few years, we hope. Just one buddy. The blonde smiled, waving at a bunch of faces he didn't recognize. Nice to meet, Shaw. Alright class, I'll be passing you your class schedules and programs. Each of you, for the next class, must have read and at least be able to discuss the general theory behind the basic arts of shinobi combat. As Naruto took his paper, droning out the teacher, he read over the subjects, reassigning his own time period for mastering and learning these assignments. The Sharingan, you say? Sarutobi mused, not even looking up from his file, the stench of tobacco wafting up from his pipe to permeate the room. Or the Mokudan. The Kunoichi replied. He looked into the book last week, and since then his interest in both bloodlines has only increased. There aren't many public works on it, given how few ever faced either abilities and survived, but he's digging them up, like he's looking for something specific. I wonder what that boy's getting himself up to. Why would a 4-year-old be so interested in the abilities of our late founders? I don't know. Though for now, his interest seems to be little more than a passing fancy. I just thought you should know Hokage-sama. Sarutobi nodded. Good. Keep me appraised of anything more you find odd. The more information we have, the easier it may be for Inoichi to treat him should it ever be necessary. Understood, sir. The young woman turned, leaving Sarutobi to his files for the time being. By the time the academy was over, Naruto was anxious to get back to his apartment in order to start the long road of getting his body back into some kind of shape. He'd gotten tired from running up and down stairs. Stairs. True. For his 4-year-old self, these stairs were about the equivalent to some tall sets of bleachers or something that he really had to lift his leg to get up over it, but still. Freaking stairs. He needed to get back into shape, and quick. He moved to step out the door when he felt something tugging at his collar, holding him back from leaving. Surprised, he paused, turning to look over his shoulder to see young Shizune holding onto him. Where do you think you're going, Naru-chan? Home. Why was she glaring at him? No. It's your first day. That means you have to go get the school ids. I knew you'd forget. That's why I came down here. Yeah, can I do that tomorrow? I'm kinda tired, Shizune. You should really get it today. She begrudged. That thing's important and tells everyone you're a member of the academy to be allowed on school grounds. Without it, some of the guards might not let you in if they think you're trying to spy on Konoha teaching methods. He struggled not to snicker. Is that what they all thought when they were kids? Yeah, hey. It kinda had been. Spying on the academy. Any spy that came back with the important Konoha Academy teaching curriculum would probably get stabbed for incompetence. It was a tab on all prospective shinobi so that strategists and mathematicians like Shika could properly determine Konoha's potential military growth based on statistical analysis. Along with the academy passing average. If numbers weren't up to snuff, or if the genin were coming out below standards, those ids and school records would be the first piece of evidence to be gathered, really. I promise I'll get it tomorrow, Ne-chan. Alright. She sighed before she reached around and coiled her arm over his shoulder to ruffle his hair. Come on, let's get something to eat, then I'll walk you home. He didn't want to waste time. He wanted to get the ball rolling, and the faster he did that the better. But you never really know when the next time, or rain check, really will be the last one. He'd learned that one the hard way. He smiled, the warm display as pleasant as ever as he looked at this younger little stranger. Sounds great. If there's one thing Naruto knew, it was that the Hokage had people watching him. Most of the time it was for his own protection. This time it was for both his protection and to keep an eye on any odd developments he might demonstrate after the incident, as Tsunade and Dan had taken to calling it. One thing he couldn't afford was Gigi getting suspicious of him. It would cause him to waste too much time and would make things all sorts of too complicated. So, obviously, he needed a place to get away from the prying eyes for a bit. Somewhere he could give his Anbu guards, wherever they were, the proverbial slip for a few minutes. And this place was none other than his own bathroom. It was the one place that none of his guards followed him. Not only was it in the middle of the apartment so no one could really get in without walking through the walls and giving away their infiltration through the chakra spike such a technique would require, but there was the more obvious issue of privacy. In a village full of people that could turn invisible, teleport, see through walls and find 1,000,001 other ways to spy on you without being seen, it was almost an unwritten rule even without the hang-ups of basic human decency. One arrow Sennin hadn't applied to the onsens in his own little version of the rulebook, but, to digress. He was now in his bathroom, doing something he was probably better at by this point, than breathing and walking at the same time. Seals. He was rapidly discovering that no matter how much he pushed himself, there's only so much a 4-year-old body is capable of.
At the very best, he would barely be able to take on a seasoned genin at this point. He was just too small. He didn't have enough power behind his limbs to throw a kunai or shuriken at blinding speed, or punch someone unconscious. A full-on adult civilian could take his blows with relative ease, and his chakra reserves were nowhere near where they were when he graduated the first time, so even his ninjutsu arsenal was limited. He was good enough to pass the academy, that was for damn sure, but not much beyond that. But, if there was one thing he could still do, it was seals. And seals were more useful than people gave them credit for. He wasn't gonna do a lot that would draw away too much attention. He wouldn't even do something that would be visible for a while. He was gonna start to condition his body for nature chakra. Nature chakra was a potent, powerful force no matter who wielded it. It wasn't on par with the power he'd wielded when he and Kurama were of one mind. Nothing ever would be, but it was a weapon he still had available to him. One that, when mastered, was damn near unstoppable. The problem with nature chakra, of course, was its inherent risk. You turned to stone. As a rule, you needed massive reserves of human chakra to even attempt the technique, which was why it was so little known. Few ninja ever managed to have that much chakra, and those that did had other weapons in their arsenal that made this little-known hermit technique seem like a waste, especially given the amount of control needed, something that people of such reserves didn't necessarily have in the first place. When one first started training with nature chakra, that was the most dangerous part. Nature was everywhere, all around the person. So the moment one opened themselves up to that power, it was like opening a pair of massive floodgates, and the whitewash is what normally took people completely by surprise and turned them to stone. The key was learning how to open those floodgates, just enough, so as to allow the body's own natural human chakra to water it down, just right. Too thick and you're half an animal, too thin and it's not having any effect. There was no way he was gonna risk turning to a stone statue in the middle of his bathroom before he could even start getting ready for Toby. He didn't have the chakra, he didn't have that stick to whack himself on the head, he didn't have anything. All he had was a little seal that would act as a sieve. One that would slowly trickle little droplets of that chakra into his system every day. There was no guarantee it would have any long-term effects, but at this stage, until time could bring about its natural changes, he would hold out hope that this thing would give him a bit of an edge when it was time to learn to do it properly. He'd traveled through time on more far-fetched hopes. He finished with a bit of a flourish, blowing lightly on the ink that now decorated his shin to dry it. Few people would look there. It was only a few seconds before he felt that familiar, welcome friend coursing through his veins again. Lowering the leg of his pants back down, he flushed the toilet to finish the theatrics show before stepping out into the hallway ready to get some sleep. He was gonna meet his last teacher tomorrow. 7 months. In 7 months the boy had burned a way clear through the academy's curriculum, passing every test ever placed in front of him with flying colors. It was only written exams that seemed to give him any pause, but tests of strength, skill and stealth, especially stealth, he seemed to push right through them as though he should be teaching the instructor. There had only ever been a handful of exceptional academy students like this. The prodigal scion of the Uchiha clan heads being the most recent. Hitaki Kakashi was the one before him, driven to such lengths by his own intense drive to be better than his father, who had brought shame to the prestige of the Hitaki clan name. Tsukumo himself was another exceptional student, but it had only been expected. The Hitaki clan was one of the last to join the village system, the last vanguard of the old way, the times of endless, unremitting war. Compared to that, the academy was probably a relaxing warm-up exercise. There were a few others that had managed to demonstrate well enough aptitude to push through the academy in quick succession. Nothing nearly as exceptional as a single year, but in 2, or so, give or take a month.
But one thing Orochimaru knew was that each one of these people that pushed themselves so hard had one thing in common. A drive. They were driven to such extremes. It wasn't by choice, it wasn't by mere happenstance. They pushed themselves because something made them believe that they had to do this. That they had something to prove or accomplish. With the Uchiha, it had been a wish to get away from the clan. Fugaku was a strict disciplinarian even by clan standards. The young prodigy had sought the freedom of a genin team, of missions that would extend their reach beyond the walls of Konoha. The Uchiha had wanted an escape. Hitaki had wanted to outrun the memory of his father. Sakumo had wanted to drive himself into the heart of Konoha and plant his clan's proverbial flag as to declare that even though he was not a founder of this village, none would look down or attempt to usurp the prestige of the Hitaki, a clan that had beaten back both the Senju and Uchihas many times over the years. But, for the life of him, he could not determine what it was that drove Naruto. And something was indeed driving him. He stayed up all night studying ninjutsu scrolls, reading history books, sharpening his kunai, training. It was more than one occasion where Orochimaru and the Anbu guarding him felt compelled to put him to sleep with a genjutsu, ones that, every day, were getting increasingly more difficult to pull off. It would be years before he could, in actuality, shrug off one of his sleeping illusions, of course. But the fact that he was able to not only detect but offer at least a token resistance was remarkable. He was no slacker when it came to the subtle art of genjutsu. But still, the driving force behind Naruto's sheer desperation in passing through this process as quickly as possible, or to be as strong as possible, was one that he simply could not discern. Not only that, but the ever-present hostility he harbored towards him had not abated in the slightest. All his defenses came up like an iron wall whenever he even heard the Sannin's voice. Coming from a child, whose first impression was a toothless smile and a grubby, drool-covered hand reaching for his hair, who with a giggle finally tugged on it hard enough to make him wince, it was a startling change for him to witness. In truth, he was somewhat bothered by it, mostly because he knew just how easy such a look could grace many features. He'd killed a lot of people. Most sensei knew about, and if he didn't, Tsunade did. But what he did in his professional life for the sake of the village, and worse, for his own ambitions, had taken him to dark places. Places he may not have crawled out of in one piece had it not been for key moments that had pulled him back from the precipice of oblivion he'd been standing on at points in his life. If Naruto ever knew about those, then it would be very easy for him to look at him with those eyes. Easy for him, for sensei, for a lot of people that halfway mattered. And that did bother him in several ways. Not the least of which was that whomever had altered Naruto's memories might have at least an inkling. And to give those memories to a boy. Who's to say he or she couldn't just go blathering on to everyone? That worried him. Still, they didn't know, for now at least, and he was grateful for that. He picked up a file, one that was steadily growing in size since he started it 7 months ago, pulling free the pad in order to jot down the notes of this last week. Subject demonstrating remarkable aptitude for the Academy's stealth exercises. Naru-chan. The second he walked into the class, he heard Shizun's voice, finding her at the top row, seated next to a handful of other students. He smiled, waving, and smiling a little more when he realized she had reserved a seat for him. Marching up, he laughed as she ruffled his hair. "This is totally unfair, you know," she bemoaned. "I gotta sit here for 4 years and you just up and get through this thing in less than 1. "I'm just awesome that way," he replied, showing off those pearly whites as he took his seat. "Yeah, well, we'll see how well you handle Zei-sensei. She's the toughest teacher here." "Yeah, right." Naruto scoffed. "She can't be on my case any more than Iruka-sensei was when I was here." Shizun offered a shrug, her face saying just how confident she was in the fact that Naruto would be eating those words. "That him?" The voice brought Naruto's eyes to the other side of his adopted sister, looking at a rather scruffy-looking Inuzuka kid. No jacket like Kiba. A bit thinner than he remembered Kiba being too. Though, come to think of it, that could have been the jacket. His dog was definitely a sight bigger than Akamaru had been, reaching the kid's knee already, whereas Akamaru had been small enough to prop on Kiba's head. He squinted at the 4-year-old. "He don't look so tough." Shizun smacked him on the shoulder. "He's 4. What the hell did you expect?" Sticking his tongue out and making a face, Naruto let some of his natural immaturity shine through as he joined the rebuke in his own way, out of sight of Shizun, of course. "He's supposed to be taller, and you're supposed to be smarter," she deadpanned. Naruto helped by continuing to make faces. Before anything more could be said, the doors opened. "Sit down, all of you." The words weren't shouted, They were barely even heard all the way up top where he, Shizune and some of the other students were sitting, but never, in his life had Naruto ever heard a room go as quiet as a crypt as fast as this room had. Every student sat in their chairs like they were falling into a regiment's formation. The woman that marched into the room was not what Naruto was expecting. She had something akin to a bowl-cut hairstyle, like Guy or Lee, only long enough to reach down to her neck, chocolate brown hair, wrinkles that were as carved into her skin as Sarujiji's, and the most distinguishing feature of all. She's practically shorter than me. He hadn't realized that he'd spoken out loud until the room, as quiet as it was, seemed to grow even quieter somehow, and every eye swiveled around to look at him. How this was accomplished without anyone moving a muscle he'd never know. Zay, as he remembered her name, didn't seem to let it affect her at all as she marched up towards her desk, speaking. It seems they taught you a good grasp of the obvious in the lower academy tiers, Uzumaki. Now let's see if we can teach you something a little above the level of potty training. It was a joke. One that pissed him off, but that he knew quite a few people would have been laughing at. Hell, he'd be laughing at it if he wasn't the victim, that is. So why couldn't he even hear a snicker? He couldn't hear or see any movement. In fact, the only thing moving in the room, unseen to all, was Inu, who winced in his hiding spot, remembering just what it was to take class with this woman. Well, now that our introductions are all finished, we'll all be heading outside for some weapons practice. Now the class started moving, smiles flitting about here and there at the prospect of abandoning these books for a little while. Smiles that were quickly wiped clean. But before we get to that boring old stuff, we'll have a fun little pop quiz to get those minds working. Doesn't that sound nice? Zayd chirped with the most pleasant smile you could ever see on someone's face. The groans seemed to feed that smile. Naruto could somehow tell this was going to be a very miserable 3 months. At the end of the day, as they were all getting ready to head on home, Zay-sensei's voice cut through the classroom chatter as easily as it had at the start of the day. Mr. Uzumaki, please stay here for a moment. I'd rather speak to you in private. Shizune threw him an apologetic look, but he smiled and waved anyway. What was the worst a teacher could do to him, really?
He sat and waited. Student after student filed out as Zay-sensei gathered her own things, getting ready to leave herself. Finally, as the last of the students left, "Sorry I called you short," he said. "You didn't call me short. You called yourself short while comparing my height to yours. And there is a difference," she replied, finishing gathering her things before she grabbed her papers and walked up to him. She stared at him for a second or two before she pulled her glasses free from the bridge of her nose and wiped at them. "Now, I'm going to give you the same speech I've given to more students than I should have since I've been teaching here, and I expect you'll, in the end, prove as stubborn as they were and give me roughly the same answer and quietly mutter about how I don't know what I'm talking about but holding out on a prayer. Here goes nothing. Might be, you're the first surprise. How about you go out and play for a few more years, Naruto blinked. The question, put so strangely, caught him a little flat, making him answer the first thing that came to mind. There's no time for that. Now, that's a curious answer, because now is the time for it. Later is when there won't be time. You're 4 years old, you shouldn't be in here training how to slice open a man's neck, but out there. She looked like she was about to go on something of a tangent when he interrupted. I'm not quitting. He appreciated the thought, really, but she just didn't understand. No one would understand that he really didn't have any time. Every second was precious. She made a bit of a face, half exasperated, half resigned. Well, at least you don't seem as stiff and boring as the last two of you that came through here. We'll see each other tomorrow then. Naruto nodded, hopping down from his seat to walk out of the class. Zay waited for him to leave before turning her eyes to the side, peering into a corner of the room. Kakashi. She could almost feel said corner stiffen. Be a dear and do your old academy sensei a favor. Could you get in contact with Oro-kun and tell him to get in touch? He never writes anymore. There was silence for a moment before the corner spoke. How the hell do you do that? She smiled. Because my dear, no matter how old you get, you never forget the basics. She began to leave. I'm not boring, you know. It was 3 weeks before he actually started feeling the first of the effects. He should have expected this, really. It was one of the most significant benefits of using nature chakra in the first place. You could detect everybody. It'd be weird if he didn't remember what it was to feel the full effect of nature chakra coursing through his veins. I mean, in his perfected sage mode, he could practically feel the fly that landed on the leaf 100 yards away. He was in tune with nature, and that really didn't have a limit. Here and now he could feel some of the chakra signatures around the village. Just a handful for now. The strongest were the ones that stood out the most. Tsunade he recognized immediately. Sarujiji he had to wait till the old man had gotten to his office and stayed there for a while. He found his Anbu too.
She seemed somewhat familiar, so he probably had sensed her somewhere specific during the war, but his memory just wasn't being jogged. Maybe she guarded him back in his original time or something. As he made his way to the academy, he kept on trying to make use of this new little development, sensing the different people here and there and trying to recognize them. Later, with some practice, he'd make a point of pegging the chakra signatures of all the ones that were important to him. That way he could find them no matter what. It was as he was thinking this, that he felt his Anbu escort with the familiar signature suddenly fall back and start turning away. It was a mystery as to why that was when his senses found another signature, this one suppressed, but quickly becoming more apparent to his newfound sixth sense as it edged closer. It made him smile. At least one of his old sensei were okay. All right, everyone settle down. Zay raised her voice as the students all but stampeded out of the academy building into the adjacent training grounds. Nothing, not even she, could ever keep a class of academy students' excitement completely suppressed when it came time for taijutsu matches. It was a practice reserved for the fourth-year students about to graduate, the fourth year of course, being the most physically demanding of the curriculum. The other 3 years were devoted to the more mental aspects of the shinobi profession. The only physical things done in the first 2 years was physical conditioning, exercises, tree jumping, hand seal practice, etc. etc. Actual taijutsu, weapon and ninjutsu practice didn't see practical application until the 3rd year, mainly it was practiced on the academy instructors. It was in the 4th year when students were finally allowed in any official capacity to face off against each other. That way the instructors could get a clear picture on who stood where in order to properly assign them to teams. The practice was done, normally 3 times a week, with the schedule randomized so the students' minds and bodies would get used to the prospect of fighting whenever it was asked of them. Of course most kids performed to expectations. The notable taijutsu powerhouse was, surprisingly, not a clan kid, but an orphan. To be fair though, most of the clans were missing from this year. No Aburame, Hyuga, Yamanaka or Nara. The best ninjutsu kid was an Uchiha though, as far as Naruto could tell, and the best kunai and shuriken flinger was, surprisingly, one of the 2 Akamichi of the group. Alright children. The diminutive teacher said, taking her place at the side of the practice ring. Let's all try to beat each other with civility. Yes. She dryly quipped as she looked through the randomized lineup for today. Goku Adu and Shizuka Maroi, please come on up so we can begin the learning. So who you gonna get paired up with this time? Shizune asked, plopping down next to him to wait with everyone else. Dunno. That was mostly true, but while the roster was mostly randomized, he'd noticed that his opponents were getting tougher and tougher. His first fight had been against Naotora, the class dead last. She was brash and loud like him. But she'd underestimated him, as did 90% of the class, and he'd used that to catch her completely off guard. And since she was the dead last, his next opponent didn't think much of the win. And so on and so on. Now they were catching on, so that element was out. But more than that, he noticed that each of his partners was just that much more dedicated, that much faster, stronger or smarter. Apparently, Zay was trying to climb him up the ladder to see where exactly he should fit when it came to team placements. So no, he didn't know per se who his next enemy would be, but he could guess that it would be one of the class midlings most likely. Though she was starting to run out of time if that was really her game, and it wasn't just random chance as they said. They only had a handful of days left. I know you don't know, but come on, take a guess or something, Naru-chan. She ruffled his hair, then he heard the sharp inhale from her on one side and footsteps to his other. Turning to look, he found none other than Uesu Tada, the favorite for this year's top rookie. He smiled. Hey Tada. The young man smiled back. Mind if I join you? He shifted a bit, shifting against Shizune to allow enough room for Tada to sit next to him. He was big for a kid. The only classmate that matched his height was one of the 2 Akamichi, physically stronger than most kids their age too, though that came at a trade-off of being somewhat slower than half the kids in the class too. Though, truth be told, given his family history, that might not be exactly a bad thing. While not of any Konoha clan, that did not mean the Uesu name was a run-of-the-mill family. It was a samurai clan. Samurai had always been the standing force of the daimyo of the various states. As far as he remembered from his day, they never really played much of a part in the hidden village affairs. They were, frankly, glorified clients. Keep our borders safe from the other daimyo, kill whoever we need you to kill without question, and we'll line your pockets with enough money to keep this show running forever, was the status quo. This time around, the status quo was a bit more skewed. The first-year curricula, in political and historical lessons, had nearly held him back from meeting his own personal deadline of graduating in a single year. While ninja were a force to be reckoned with on any battlefield, having unlocked the secrets of chakra and the array of skills that came with such, samurai were still very much the dominant military power of the continent. One ninja was worth a handful of samurai, but there were a hell of a lot more samurai than there were ninja in the daimyo's employ. Now, the daimyo could do more than threaten them with cutting off the cash flow. He could threaten them with war. Or more likely extermination. What's more, he could win. It would be a brutal and bloody win for either side, that would effectively eviscerate both parties, leaving them as little more than carrion for the vultures that would swoop in from all sides to eat at the carcass. But now the daimyo around the continent seemed to have decided to hold onto some of their testicles when the villages were formed this time around. That left them with some negotiating leeway. One of those, in Konoha at least, was a student exchange program. A child of a samurai clan, a child of a shinobi clan, leaving their homes to live and serve their new families, in whatever way was seen fit. This was to promote a lasting peace, friendship, love and trust between the great houses. And officially, it was the samurai better preparing themselves for the eventuality of fighting shinobi, if not domestic ones then definitely foreign. No child from a samurai clan would be taught the true fighting techniques of the samurai beyond a handful of basics when it came to sword wielding. A child from a shinobi clan, though especially Hyuga and Uchiha, that one had some trade to show off when he went off to his new home. That one could answer questions and teach them. Then, when the kids went back home, the samurai kid had 5 years shinobi experience and secrets under his belt. The shinobi kid had 3 years of philosophical study and 2, at best, of sword combat training, since most samurai started training their children at the ages of 14. Not exactly a huge amount of time to learn things from grandmasters and such. But oh well. Such is life. Half the time the samurai kid just ended up learning sword techniques anyway, so Konoha wasn't exactly a victim that lived up to their side of the bargain, either, at any rate. Tada sat and Naruto resisted the urge to poke some fun at Shizune who, quite obvious to him, had something of a crush on the guy. It would get him a few laughs, but she knew where he lived. The fight was decent as far as academy-level students go. Both of them had their strengths and tried to use them. But one good kick that smacked against a forehead down to do, and that was that. The other fights were, for the most part, much the same. A good lucky hit normally ended them. Rarely was the fight reduced to out-brawling the other, and only the Akamichi ever got their opponents to yield, and even then, only when they managed to get them in a good hold, which by now many students had learned to avoid by any means necessary. Kato Shizune and Kanbei Shin, take your places, Zei finally called. Shizune took a breath before standing. Wish me luck. Naruto nodded and smiled. Good luck. She marched down to the practice ring, standing opposite her opponent. Kanbei wasn't anything particularly special from what he could tell, no real strengths, no real weak points either. Begin. Shizune opened up with a volley of practice shuriken, a textbook tactic to get her enemy off balance when she closed in, and it worked well enough. The moment Kanbei used to dodge, she was closing the distance, launching herself at the young man with a flying kick, knocking him flat on his ass despite his hasty defense with the unbalanced footing. She jumped, looking to capitalize on her early advantage with a pounce to pin him to the ground, only for the aspiring genin to roll out of the way, kicking at her ribs with a clumsy kick that, nevertheless, hurt and knocked her on her side as both students scrambled to get back up. The door was flung open with a crack that drove the knob into his wall. Was this your idea all along? Orochimaru turned around, looking up from his book as he raised a slender eyebrow. You barging into my office looking for all the world as though you wished to strangle me? No, I don't believe this was any plan of mine. You haven't taken on a student in 6 years and suddenly you're applying to take a team. He snapped the book closed, smirking. You and Sensei have been pestering me to take a more active role in the village for a while now. I figured why not start with this. Just as Naruto's about to graduate then. Coincidence. Besides, I placed myself on the reserves list. I'm just there to convince whoever gets assigned as a sensei to his eventual team to step down so you can fill in the spot. Oh come now. He smiled blithely. Where's the trust, Su-chan? Oh screw you. He marched to a chair, seating himself on it as he tossed his book on the end table and laced his hands over his stomach. What exactly are you complaining about? That you're using Naruto as some kind of stepping stone, Oro. He pursed his lips, mulling over the thought, then he smirked. I might be just a little bit guilty of such. But what exactly are you complaining about? I'm the best possible sensei in this village, just look at Anko-chan. She's one of our strongest whack jobs, I'll give you that. We're all a little crazy, Tsunade. He doesn't need you making it worse, or you making some kind of statement. And his teammates won't need you neglecting them in favor of the prodigy. Which he is. The other students will get by, but the whole point of early academy enrollment is to bring those talents to their full potential. And then you wonder why I say Saru-sensei spoiled you rotten. The sighed over dramatically, smirking faintly as he saw how his actions irritated her. If there was one thing Tsunade hated, it was being dismissed. Oh well. I suppose I'll just have to shoulder the burden of Sensei's partisanship. Is that all? Don't make me kick you through the wall, she growled. He opened his eyes, looking up at her, just the slightest bit more serious, though the smile remained. You know how this is gonna end by now. You'll shout and scream and I'll ignore you completely and do whatever I want. If it comes down to a fight, we'll blow up half the village training grounds before Sensei shows up to have us pulled apart, where we'll get a timeout and a rather stern lecture regarding the woes caused by mass property damage. And then I'll still do whatever I want. So can we skip all of that and just get to the me doing whatever I want part? You're an ass, you know that. The smile spread. I might be just a little bit guilty of such. It was just a few minutes after she'd left that a familiar older gentleman opened the door to his office, in a similar fashion, driving the knob that much deeper into the cracked wall as he held an equally familiar application form. Was this your idea all along? The Sannin smiled, half frustrated, half sardonic. No, I don't believe it was. OWWWW. Big baby. Naruto teased. She smacked him upside the head. Shut up. Then her hand returned to her jaw. That really hurt. He had no doubt, it looked like it hurt. If she didn't live with Tsunade, she'd probably be sporting an ugly bruise for the next week. As it was, it'd be gone by tomorrow most likely. She managed to win, but one really good punch had nearly taken her out of the fight when half the class could have sworn her jaw had broken given the sound of the hit. To everyone's surprise, and his personal relief, it sounded worse than it was, and she kept herself in the fight, managing to carve out a win. She landed enough hits to have Zei call the match in her favor. Now they were down to just a handful more students, and Naruto was starting to wonder when the hell he was going to be. Uzumaki, Naruto and Uesu Taida, please take your places, Zei called, a hush leveling the area before each student began to murmur with one another. Huh. Looks like she decided it best to work from the top to the bottom rather than the bottom to the top. He stood up, listening as Taida did the same, both of them marching down to the practice ring. When they arrived, Taida bowed at the waist. If there was one thing that could be said about the samurai clan boy, it was that he was polite and did his best to follow the traditions of his family. Which meant his greatest strength was essentially taijutsu. He aced all of his tests and written tactic exams, was slightly above average in accuracy, but, most likely due to his upbringing before coming to the village, he didn't put as much effort in his ninjutsu, so that was just average. Which essentially meant, especially due to his size, he had to use his ninjutsu to its fullest advantage over him. He took his stance, the basic academy stance. Taida did the same, though his was a bit more rigid in his foot positioning. He probably wouldn't use too many kicks if that was the case. So overcoming the taijutsu reach advantage wouldn't be impossible, just unlikely now. Begin. Zei shouted. With a handseal, Naruto focused. Bunshin no jutsu. He was never good at making a single, regular clone.
100 was an entirely different matter. Within a second the academy practice grounds were covered from corner to corner in grinning blondes.
The students gasped, even Zei leaned forward in her seat, looking intently now at the fight. Taida's eyes widened, but in quick motion drew his shuriken and began throwing. A few of the clones dispelled as the weapons cut through the fragile illusion that formed them. The rest charged. To Naruto's surprise, Taida didn't choose to flee as most shinobi would have done, trying to get to a more advantageous position, or even buy time in order to think of a plan. He held his ground, bracing himself. Charging in the middle of his clones, Naruto grinned. It was a good plan. He could think of more than a few ways to kill his enemy, none would fail. He'd gotten too good at killing dead things that refused to stay down for an aspiring genin to have a prayer, even with him like this. But he didn't want a clean win. He just wanted to see how much work he still had waiting for him. How much distance he'd have to cross before he could even have a prayer. The clones struck, and the blows passed him by, doing no damage and merely dispelling themselves with the fragile break. Until finally there was one solid kick across his face that nearly knocked him over. Until his hand snapped forward and grabbed the owner of the offending limb. With a brutal punch to the stomach that knocked the wind out of him, and a follow-up that hit him about as hard as Shizun's opponent had hit her, striking him across the cheek, Naruto scarcely had time to catch his breath before he was thrown onto the ground with a solid thud. Not even fast enough to avoid an academy student. He recovered and looked up as Taida pounced, looking to pin him to the ground and get the win. And for a moment, he was not in the academy training grounds. He was not facing an all-too-polite exchange student. He was not in a friendly test. He was in a battlefield. The screams of dying, wounded men rising up to a crescendo of noise around him. A hurricane of sound that clawed at his ears as he looked up at the lone Sharingan eye spinning in its iris. The crackle of lightning roaring over the battlefield noise as Konoha's last Hokage rushed in for the kill. the howling of 1,000 birds meeting the unrelenting force of a Rasengan before his own deathblow came at the hands of a tearful Sakura, his body sealed and burned by his remaining student. The last Hokage. The first of Team 7. His chakra surged, taking form in his hand, the shape of a whirling sphere coalescing into the faintest silhouette before he caught himself, blinked. The memories of a dead man in a dead future vanishing like the ghosts of shadow, and he holds back from the deadly blow. From sheer reflex. He vanishes in a puff of smoke, leaving only an Academy standard explosive trap at his feet. Tada's eyes widened, his legs bracing to move when the thing exploded in a massive cloud of smoke, leaving him sputtering and hacking up a lung. Gotcha. The students heard through the cloud before Tada stumbled out of the impenetrable smoke, still hacking up his lungs with tears leaking from his eyes. Match. The students heard Zay shout before a quick E-rank wind jutsu did its work to blow the cloud away, revealing Naruto sitting at the edge of the ring, grinning from ear to ear despite the bloody lip. Soon enough the muttering of the other students began and Zay clapped thrice to get them all to calm down. She looked tense, her lips pursed a bit more than usual as she looked them over. Naruto didn't dare look up, worried that if he did, and she'd seen that moment. If she'd felt the killing intent, his look would be all the confirmation she needed. Alright students, we're done for the day now. I suggest you all go home and enjoy your weekend. Next week will be your last before the final examinations and we see which one of you made it. Good luck. And with that the teacher began to gather her things. Tada made his way over, still coughing a bit, his eyes still red from tearing up. A good match. The raven-haired youth said, bowing at the waist, smiling as he straightened. If that had been actual explosive tags. You'd be dead in that case too. The faux 4-year-old grinned once more, this damn smile slipping on so very easily all over again. Huh, that was fun, I want a rematch. Tada's smile grew a bit, holding just the slightest bit of bemusement. You're rather odd, Naruto-san. By the time he got back home Naruto was full and satisfied. Tsunade had picked him and Shizune up, healed their cuts and bruises and then treated them to an early celebratory lunch. 3 more days and he'd find out who exactly he was getting on a team with. He'd be a genin, one step closer to Hunter Nin. When he stepped into his home, it was to be greeted by the now familiar sensation of his nightly watcher already in wait and Kakashi-sensei leaving, with his shift now done with her arrival. It was a moment's curiosity that wormed its way into his brain, idly trying to think of who she was. The signature was familiar but strangely alien. As he went about his nightly routine, getting ready to sleep, that idle curiosity kept on gnawing at him, getting just a little bit stronger, a little bit more irritating. Finally, as he was about to step into bed he realized something. Why the hell doesn't he just ask? And so with a sharp about face, he follows the signature, marching out of his room and down the hallway towards his potted plant. He stretches out his hand, and with a glimmer in the air, the genjutsu falls away, revealing the woman in an Anbu mask. She's surprised. Any Anbu would be really, but still he can't recognize her behind the mask. He smiles up at her. Hi, I'm Naruto, what's your name? She tilts her head to the side, looking at him as though she is the most curious of hawks. One that had just found a rodent willing to walk up to it in order to curiously sniff at its talons. In a way, he rather supposed he was. She didn't tell him her name. It had taken almost 5 minutes for him to get more than a go back to sleep Uzumaki-san. The conversation was short, clipped, a little awkward, and a little amusing from his perspective. He supposed he should have expected such. She was probably still reeling at the fact that he had found her at all. But still, she didn't give him her name, so he just called her An-chan. He'd nearly made Kakashi trip out of his tree when he called him Bu-san the next day. Either the two of them were too embarrassed to say that they'd been caught, or Gigi had decided to take on a wait-and-see approach regarding this little development. Kakashi could still hide from him with a little more effort though. He did it the next day. He was good enough. An-chan always had just a little bit of her chakra exposed though. Just enough for him to pick up her signal. Still, this livened up his days a little. For nearly the last week every day he'd go out to do some training, and now had the full and unbridled capacity to ask Kakashi for advice whenever he found him. Which happened to be whenever Kakashi didn't want to put in the full effort to hide well. So with the Anbu, having no orders to do the contrary, and not being a big enough ass to ignore him completely, not having his book helped in this last bit, reluctantly gave a little advice and even showed him the basics of an Anbu chakra control exercise when he noticed that such was what Naruto was primarily working on. Then at night, when he'd get home he'd make dinner for himself and An-chan, something that primarily consisted of ramen. All the while he would talk her ear off, hoping to get a word of response but mostly just talking to her while she just stood there. She never ate a bite of the food while he was awake, but it was always gone by the time he woke up. He hoped she wasn't just throwing it away. Tonight was the last night before the team assignments and he was practically bouncing off the bloody walls. Just one more day and he'd be a genin again. Step 1 would be finished with. He finished off his shower, drying himself off before he dressed and stepped out of the bathroom. He was 5 now, so just one more year before he wouldn't need to use that thing anymore. He sensed as Kakashi left and Chan arrived. "Chan," he called, smiling. The woman didn't even put up the pretense of stealth anymore, marching in through his front door, judging by the sound. He marched out of his bathroom, stepping out to the hallway where he found, much to his surprise, his dining table overlaid with a number of bags, stuffed with food. "You cannot keep having ramen every day." The flat drawl brought his eyes over to her, standing in a corner halfway across the room, cloaked from head to toe as if she'd never moved. It was impressive considering his whole table was full of stuff. "Oh come on, I make good ramen." "Not anymore, you don't," she answered in a, to all senses, completely impassive tone. But Naruto recognized smug satisfaction a mile away and his danger senses were tingling. He blinked, confused for a second before he paled, bolting out of the room and into the kitchen. It was a moment later when half the neighborhood was woken up by his anguished cry of despair. "I hate you," he hissed, stuffing the last of the groceries into its proper place in his now empty cabinets. "I'll live," she replied from the other room. He huffed, staring up at the assortment of foods. "What am I supposed to mock? Food. Everyone's a comedian or something," he muttered to himself. Between Zay, Dan and now Chan, he was getting rather tired of witty retorts and dry sarcasm. He looked up again, pulling out a bag of rice and then picking out some meats from his freezer. A little while later he set 2 plates down on his table, already knowing Chan wouldn't eat now, but leaving it out for her anyway. The chicken was a bit saltier than it should be, and the rice a little undercooked, but not bad for a first try if he did say so himself. It was edible at least. And this time it didn't end with a burnt refrigerator, exploding toaster and an electrical fire in the bathroom. "Hey Chan," he called. "Any idea who's gonna turn out to be my sensei tomorrow?" "None," she answered truthfully. "You'd be better off asking Bu-san." He was about to ask who the hell that was when he recalled that was the very name he'd placed on Kakashi to keep up appearances. "I guess he'd see more of the academy since he's around during the day." She said nothing to that. Finally he was done. Hopping off his chair, he took his place and marched onto the stool to wash it in the sink before putting it away. He marched right up to his nighttime watcher, smiling at her. "Night Chan." She nodded. He leaned forward and hugged her. Once more he got that feeling of being a mouse beneath the gaze of the hawk. One that was beginning to wonder why its talons hadn't carved their way through soft rodent flesh yet. He giggled, letting her go and heading off to bed. The next morning the plate was empty. "All right then class," Zay called, clapping thrice as she set her books down on the desk. "Today is the last day. And all of you will now be assigned to teams where you'll most likely be paired up with at least one member of this class who you can't stand, and you'll all have to look at each other and work together every day for the next few years. Aren't you all excited?" Naruto fought down a snicker. That was fairly accurate, all things considered. She left out the part of how the teams eventually grow to consider each other family though. "All right, now let's get this started, Team 1. This is so exciting," Shizune whispered beside him, and he has to smile a little more. He could barely remember the day he was assigned to teams. But he did remember the excitement, the anticipation rushing through his limbs. He keeps that moment for as long as he can. Grips it. Every good memory is something he tries to hold onto as much as possible. Otherwise the bad ones will overwhelm him when those moments come where he can't just block them out anymore. And those moments are there, circling like ravenous wolves, waiting to sink their fangs deep into his flesh. Team 4. Zay calls. "Kato Shizune, Inazuka Katsuya and Yoshinari Itsu. Your sensei will be Muniyori Oshika." "Oh, that's me. That's me, Naru-chan." She hugged him, so suddenly he almost slid off his chair as she squealed into his hair. He was happy for her. It seemed for a moment she was torn between hugging him and waiting out for his own team to be announced and leaving with hers. Soon enough though, she left with hers. Team 8. Naruto Uzumaki. His ears practically swiveled forward to hear better. Naotora Ryoko and Kurosuru Hachiba. Ryoko, he thought, turning to look at the girl he'd beaten in the practice ring just a few weeks ago, his first opponent in it, the class dead last. That means that, congratulations Mr. Uzumaki, you not only managed to graduate within a year but you also managed to snag the top spot, Zay remarked. As expected of my future student, a voice hissed from somewhere behind him. Naruto's blood went cold at that unmistakable voice. No. Turning to look at the back of the class, Naruto found none other than the snake Sannin morphing out of a wall, smirking at him. The first words out of Naruto's mouth the second he got to the designated meeting place at the village edge was a vehement query. Was this your idea the entire time? The snake Sannin paused, lips pursing, almost in displeasure for a moment before he schooled his features. Does it matter? He guessed it didn't. He was still stuck in the same boat regardless, and it had been him that had showed off his memories to get Orochimaru to nominate him. He knew that there was an ulterior motive. He just assumed it was glory seeking at nominating a strong candidate for the academy, not to actually be his sensei and take even greater glory when he assumed the credit for having taught said strong candidate. He guessed the motive, he just deduced the wrong method. So you're really gonna be our sensei then? Ryoko asked, staring up at the man, not with a little bit of awe. While Orochimaru was a known recluse in the village, his prowess as a ninja was known worldwide. He wondered how long it would be before everyone knew him as a sicko and a power-mad lunatic. Sweet. We're getting the best of the Sannin as our sensei. Hachiba grinned, adjusting his new forehead protector. Orochimaru's smile seemed innocent enough, but it made Naruto's skin crawl all the same. The best? Perhaps. But my teaching you remains to be seen, Team 8. The two genin looked confused before the Sannin clarified. The academy merely judges if you children have the faintest potential to actually become genin. I am the one that gets the final say on whether they were right or wrong today. So, you're going to take something of a test. What kind of test? Ryoko grinned. We'll beat it no problem if it gets you as our sensei. Now his smile was clearly predatory, even to them. We'll see. It didn't take him long to realize where they were headed. He should have expected it really. The first place he met this bastard is the place where he decides to hold his genin test. Training Ground 44, better known as the Forest of Death, loomed over them like a monolithic beast in its own right. We're going in there? Hachiba asked. As an answer, Orochimaru forms two clones, each one grabbing a genin by the shoulder as he places his hand atop Naruto's head before the youth can react. Then they're gone in the blur of a Shunshin jutsu. When they appear again, they're in the very heart of the forest. Thickened trees hundreds of feet high blot out the sun. A dreary gloom hangs over the place like a pall. This is your test. The serpent says as his shadow clones dispel and he takes a few steps forward, away from them.
Naruto looks around, searching for danger while trying to keep his eyes fixed on the snake.
Ryoko is the one that begins to ask, what exactly are we surviving? Suddenly, all three feel a sharp, burning agony lance up their legs. They each scream and Naruto has enough speed to look down in time to see a snake slithering into the grass. Two puncture marks standing out on his clothed calf. The stain of blood darkens the fabric of his pants. You have 3 days. The Sannin said, bringing all three students' eyes up towards his smiling veneer. Make it out of this forest alive. And you're my students. Fail and... well. That should be obvious considering you've just been poisoned. Are you insane? Hachiba shouted. You can't be serious. Naruto drew his kunai and charged and attacked, all his suspicions proven in an instant. Orochimaru moved. His eyes could barely follow the movement before his arm was snagged in an iron-laced grip. The Sannin's strength seemed brutally unreal as the pale man painfully twisted his arm to just before the point of breaking it. With a single twitch it would snap, with a different one it would dislocate. Not nice, Naru-chan. The serpent hissed in that slithering voice as he looked to his other two students. 3 days, he repeated. Then you're beyond saving. Then he was gone, releasing Naruto before he melted into the shadows of this forest like a specter. The snake Sannin chuckled as he emerged from his Shunshin. The looks on their faces. Was this your idea the entire time? Oh, for God's sake. He snapped, whirling on the intruder that appeared in a similar Shunshin technique, only to reveal Sarutobi's head Anbu. Hitaki. He all but growled. The next person that asked him that question was going to get hurt, badly. That poison non-lethal? He trailed off, but the warning was obvious. Something of my own brew, he said, smirking a bit. He always did enjoy seeing his own work in its full splendor. They'll certainly feel like they're dying. The silver-haired ninja nodded. What exactly is the test about? Why not just go with Sarutobi's bell test? The Sannin snorted. Bah, you'd have them chase you around with such a simplistic goal. No, he chuckled. What brings about truth in anyone isn't a goal, and it isn't a mission. His eyes gained something of a distant look, the smile evaporating, and Kakashi had to wonder just where he'd ventured down into his memories. It's fear, he finally said. And facing true danger. Watch and learn, Hitaki. This is how shinobi of Konoha are to be tested. He can't be serious, He's not serious, is he? Hachiba shouted, almost sounding hysterical. I'm not waiting to find out if he is, Ryoko replied, raven hair whipping around as she turned to and fro, seemingly searching for a direction to move in. South. Naruto growled, rubbing his arm. What? She asked, whirling around to look at him. We gotta go south, he answered. This place is north of the village. Sounds good to me. Hachiba readily agreed. You sure? This had better not be you trying to look cool or something, Uzumaki. I'm sure. He shot back. This place was too troublesome, twice over in order for him to forget where the hell it was. Twice the snake had screwed him and his team over here. That was 2 times too many. The second he had the strength to do it, he was shoving a Rasengan down the Sannin's throat. Better be, she snapped. It wasn't long before they were running through the trees. From places hidden, Kakashi watched Orochimaru's smile grow a bit. Not a bad deduction from Naruto, the Anbu surmised. Still, he looked around. I recognize this place. We're at the northern edge of the forest. Almost 3 days travel exactly from the forest to the village edge, and that's if you have a clue as to where you're going. Did you set them up to fail or something? The Sannin smirked. It was just beginning to approach sundown when the 3 genin could no longer shrug off the truth. They felt horrible. It had started with coughs, from there, an all too dry throat, rashes breaking out over their flesh and nausea churning their guts. They each knew it would only get worse. To his shame, Naruto was the first one that made the others stop. He was smaller, his metabolism was faster with his healing. The poison was affecting him at nearly twice the rate of his teammates. He tried to keep pace regardless until finally, his legs failed him on a jump, and he nearly plunged to the forest floor to break a limb, or his neck. It was only the fact that he knew how to stick to a tree that saved him. You okay? Hachiba called a moment later as he came to a stop on another branch. Naruto actually had to take a moment to catch his breath before he could even think about answering. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of his rib cage. He's the great Uzumaki. He'll be fine. Ryoko mocked through hard-labored breaths. We're the ones that'll keel over, nay? This isn't the time for goddamn jokes, Hachiba growled. We have to keep moving. Naruto looked up at the sun, now red in the sky. No, Ryoko hissed, taking a seat as Naruto managed to gather the strength to pull himself up to the branch he'd been hanging off of. We've got to get food and make some kind of camp before the sun sets. Make camp? To what? Sleep. Yes, numbnuts, we need that. We also need to get food. We could be almost out of here. We have to keep on moving. No. We have to make camp because if we keep on going and we're still stuck here later, it'll be too dark to see, and we'll be tired, poisoned and hungry. The boy panics. Orochimaru observed. He's a genin. Surprised he hasn't burst into tears by now. The girl's keeping her cool well enough though. The pale man nodded. Indeed. I wonder just how she is considered the dead last. Overconfident as hell, didn't study and sucks for everything but taijutsu, even that is just street brawling more than anything else. Orphanage recruit. Close enough. Father's a trader, travels constantly, almost never in the village. Mother's a lover of fine wines, to put it politely. Orochimaru smirked. Old Zay must be losing her touch. Difficult to teach when they refuse to listen. They made camp, such as it was. Naruto, allowing nature chakra to guide him as best he could with his lack of practice, found a hollowed out, dead tree, big enough for them to use. He was relieved when Ryoko and Hanbei volunteered to go get food as opposed to gathering firewood. Right now, though he hadn't said anything, he could barely see straight, let alone take down an animal big enough for all of them to eat. And he was only feeling worse. I'll feel better with some food and sleep, he thought to himself, his headache pounding across his forehead. He could not die here. He had to survive this. There was so much he had to do still. He moved about gathering dry leaves and twigs for the kindling. The forest of death had plenty of those, so thankfully he didn't have to expel too much effort. All in all, with his small hands and waning strength, it took 3 trips to gather an amount he thought would be enough to last them the night. The sun had set before his teammates got back. Hachiba managed to get 3 squirrels. Ryoko just caught a single snake. Hers was the more satisfying meal in his personal opinion. Can he really do this? Hachiba suddenly asked as they ate. This is crazy. He can't just kill fellow leaf ninja. Never. Trust. A snake. Naruto wheezed, eyes drooping a bit despite his effort to finish the meal. Thought he was your special mentor or something, Uzumaki. Ryoko hissed, biting into a rather tasteless piece of meat. The forest of death didn't offer much in the way of seasoning. This time, strained as the words were, the hostility was unmistakable in his tone. even if his words hadn't portrayed it just as easily. Kill him. One day. She opened her mouth as though she was about to say something more when she finally took a good look at him. Hey, you okay? Hey. But his world went dark and the two genin had to actually scramble to keep him from tipping face first into the open fires. Ryoko gnawed on her lower lip as she and Hachiba settled Naruto back, watching him convulse on the ground as his eyes rolled so far back only the whites could be seen and blood began leaking from his nose. Shit, he's dying. He's really dying, she screamed, holding him down for lack of anything better to do. No shit, he's dying. He's half our size, Hachiba shouted right back. They held him down, every second basking in unimaginably slow agony for all huddled within that little hollow. It seemed an eternity before he finally settled. What the hell are we gonna do? Hachiba groaned, rocking a little where he sat. He probably didn't notice. Her mouth was dry as she answered, feeling her own heart pounding with adrenaline-fueled fear. We're gonna go to sleep for a few hours. Wake up, and carry him out of here the rest of the way, that's what. Then when we get back, we're getting Hokage-sama to hold down that snake bastard so we can cut his balls off and feed them to him. Despite her bravado, her shaking hands and pale features showed just how rattled she really was. Despite how much they needed it, neither child got much sleep that night. And the next morning, Naruto was as pale as a corpse. His breathing didn't sound much better than a dead man's either. Worst of all, he wasn't waking up. Orochimaru smirked. Kakashi had long since left and his replacement was keeping to herself a ways off after Kakashi had briefed her and told her not to interfere. The poison had worked its way through Naruto's system even quicker than he'd hoped. We have to leave him. Ryoko whipped her head up, blinking at her fellow, aspiring genin as though he'd just grown a second head. What? We can't carry him, the boy explained. We'll just tire ourselves out and we won't be able to. We're not leaving him here, she protested, cutting him off. He's still alive. Not for much longer, Hachiba shouted back. It's just been a day, look at him. We've got to move fast and we can't do that if we. She stood up, silver gray hair whipping around her face as she all but snarled. We're gonna carry this dumb ass back and I don't care if I've got to tie him to you, get me. Hachiba opened his mouth moving to protest when he seemed to think better of it and closed his mouth. Ryoko looked down, thinking. We'll carry him in shifts. You go first, I go next. I'm not going. You're going first. What do you think, I'm stupid? I carry him first, tire myself out and you just haul ass when it's your turn? You go first. I'll live up to my end. You're not. You can stay here and bitch with me and keep wasting time. You can try to run and we can fight, wasting even more time, or you can do what I tell you and we can try to get the hell out of this. Long and short of it is we're not leaving the little bastard. Orochimaru watched, yellow eyes gleaming like jewels as the sun rose over the edge of the horizon. You wanted this. He turned a little, looking at the woman-child in her Anbu uniform, the stark white mask glinting with the rays of the early morning. That's the purpose of the test. To see if they'll leave him to die, she concluded, her head tilting to the side. I'm only not certain which outcome will cause them to succeed or fail. The Sannin smiled a little. They should do what proper Konoha ninja should do. That's the only way to succeed. And Naruto? How will you judge him in his state? He'll pass, of course. You would take him as a student no matter what? That hardly seems fair. Life is fair. It was not, by any stretch of the imagination, how she could have ever dreamed her shinobi career would start. She was feeling sicker than yesterday, her bones ached, she wanted nothing more than to lie down and sleep again even as her stomach churned at the edge of nausea. Every muscle felt little better than overcooked noodles, flimsy and weak as she forced them to push her along in ever shorter leaps across the trees. And to think, she still had to carry him after Hachiba couldn't do it anymore. She coughed, stopping in her run to lean against the trunk of a tree. It sounded wet, she could almost taste the phlegm at the back of her throat as spittle specked the hand she'd used to cover her mouth. Hachiba stopped ahead of her, his pasty skin and black ringed eyes serving to only let her imagine how bad she must have looked as well. She was going to kill that snake bastard. She looked up, coiling her muscles again before jumping off. Keep going. Even speaking felt like it leached out the energy from her. She tried to ignore the blood that had been mixed with the spit. Are you seriously gonna let him have a team? Sarutobi sighed. It had been the third time she'd asked in twice as many minutes. And the 100th time since a week ago when her teammate, his student, first filed for the position. What do you want me to do exactly, Tsunade? Walk up to him and say, yes, well, seeing as how you've signed all the appropriate paperwork and properly filled out all agreements clauses, guarantees and have proceeded to do your due diligence well in time for the responsibility. I've decided to not grant this request despite the fact that I have no other reserve teachers on standby, Simply because your motivations are iffy at best and I don't trust you. And this is primarily based on a simple hunch of having known you for the last 20 years. How exactly do you view that as being anywhere near impartial as I'm supposed to be as Hokage? Oh come on. You and I both know Orochimaru is practically the antithesis to Genin instructor. He trained Anko. One student who he took on long trips to train in private without doing anything below C rank. Does not a Genin instructor make? Maybe not, but we've always pressured him to interact with the villagers more. This time he'll have to with a large team. Yes. Because Orochimaru's people skills let him mingle oh so well. Do you remember the last time we managed to convince him to go to a festival? Sarutobi nearly winced. That had been interesting to say the very least. He can still train those students to be good, strong shinobi that will serve the village well. Do I really have to bring up the incident reports on Anko for this? Sarutobi rolled his eyes. Alright look. He's always had trouble with people and he might not be the warmest of instructors, but the fact of the matter is that outside of using my executive powers as village leader to revoke his application, something that would be a very gross misuse of my authority given his results. Yes, I know your reservations on Anko Tsunade. He interrupted before she could start. The fact remains though that she is still one of our very best operatives for high-ranking assassinations. Her record outside the village can't be disputed. Spotty as her record within the village walls might be. So yes, I am going to allow him his chance. His chance? She scoffed. You make it sound as if there's something other than personal ambition as the motivation here. The old monkey rubbed his temples. Did you two fight? Did he kill your pet? Or call you a dirty name and I miraculously missed the ensuing blowout or something? No, I just know him well enough to call out his BS. I trust him with my life, but that's my prerogative after fighting next to him for 20-some odd years. And where I trust him I can still very easily admit he's a complete dick half the time and not the best choice to be looking after pre-teens. I'm not going to take the team away from him, he stated flatly, leaning back in his seat. If you're really so interested in this, take your own private steps to assuage your worries as long as it doesn't blow up half the village. And yes, that is as close to a green light as you're gonna get to stick your nose in his business to a reasonable degree, but his request for a Genin team is going to be upheld. As much as you or I might hold reservations about the pseudo-parenting skills he'll need to help these students, the fact is he'll never get the opportunity to prove either of us wrong or right if we don't give him the chance every once in a blue moon. Can I come back here and kick you when this whole thing blows up? She asked with a look that could have scratched his face off. You're allowed to come back here and tell me I told you so, that much I'll grant. It was a little past noon when it was her turn. Hachiba looked ready to keel over, breathing like a winded dog, coughing up half his lungs between breaths. She trudged over, feet slogging through the light mud of the forest floor. They'd long since abandoned the treetops when it was clear their legs didn't have the strength to carry them in the jumps anymore. When she lifted Naruto, her arms nearly failed her, and it was obvious after a moment that she wouldn't be able to carry him like the child he was. She opted instead to lift him to lay across her shoulders, every muscle in her legs feeling as though it was being slowly carved open by flaying knives. She looked up at Hachiba. Come on, she said, let's just keep moving. He nodded and soon enough they were both walking again. They didn't have the strength to run anymore. She had to focus to even do that. Concentrate on just putting one foot in front of the other, struggling with waning strength. Her insides burned, her throat bled, black fluid leaked from her tear ducts as blue veins became visible under pasty white skin. Worse and worse the symptoms grew as she focused on just putting one foot in front of the other. Then she tripped. She hadn't noticed the root, she could barely see the ground so clouded her vision was. It snagged on the top of her foot and she fell forward, not even having the presence of mind to break her fall. The breath left her lungs and Naruto's weight on her shoulders didn't help at all. She hissed, cursing as she struggled to draw in a proper breath amidst her coughs. She glanced up, watching as Hachiba kept walking. She would have called for him if she had the strength. She watching him keep walking as she struggled to get to her hands and knees. Come on. She thought with a strangled hiss. You still have a whole day left before you roll over and die in a ditch, damn it. Move. She got to her feet. When she looked down at the half-dead Naruto, she reached down to lift him. She only succeeded in nearly tripping again in the slick mud. When lifting him failed, she tried dragging. A sound not entirely unlike a giggle escaped her when she realized she was losing the strength in her fingers to make a firm enough grip, to go with the lack of strength. She walked over to his side. She didn't know if she'd have the strength to stand back up, so she didn't kneel. She kicked him. Come on. You've been sleeping enough. Get up, I can't carry you anymore, and Hachiba left. I'm talking to a corpse. She noted somewhere, ignoring it as she dug her foot into his ribs again. Come on. Get up, you damn bastard. But he lay there, Pale and unmoving, she wasn't even sure if he was breathing anymore. Get up! Get up! She kicked one more time with all her strength, and on this one her leg buckled beneath her, sending her to the ground where she was close enough to lift a fist and let it fall against his chest. You're not supposed to die this easy, she hissed, unaware of the frustrated, angry tears that glimmered behind her eyes. Get up, please. She tries to stand, she can't. I don't want to die here. She's crying now, and the sobs are unmistakable this time. Not here. Not in this forest. Not in some forgotten corner where that coward Hachiba would be the only one to survive. Enough. She doesn't recognize the voice, doesn't even see the person before she's lifted by strong, calloused hands, hugging the fabric of a cloak as the sudden vertigo of her movement churns her guts with nausea all over again. You're interfering with my exam. She recognizes that voice though, and she clutches the robe tighter, burying her face into the neck of the woman. Your test is done. She hears her state flatly, the voice jumping from the pulse point of her neck against Ryoko's cheek. The woman starts walking, and before long she's carried out of the forest. As she leaves, she notices that little, pleased smile on that horrid, pale face. It's a leering, wicked thing to her eye, one that sends a shiver down her spine. She closes her eyes and thanks whatever might be listening out there for ending this nightmare. It was hours after this that he woke to a white ceiling. Not exactly unfamiliar. What was unfamiliar was the fact that he was feeling, all things considered, great. Seeing as how his last memories was of a poison-induced blackout, he rather suspected he should be feeling a bit crappier, truth be told. He sat up, surprised to find Dan sleeping in a corner of the room, a trail of drool leaking from the corner of his mouth to trail down his cheek. "Daw," he croaked. His throat was dry. Why did that always seem to happen when he woke up at the hospital? He reached for the bedside table where a full glass of water was waiting for him. Evidently, Tsunade knew better with so many patients. He drank the warm water gratefully, swallowing and gasping for breath when he was done. Dan. The white-haired man jumped a bit, scrunching up his features at the foul taste in his mouth. Uck. Oh hey kiddo, you're up. How the heck did I even get here? Where are Hachiba and Ryoko? Anbu carried you in. Dan explained. Su-chan was having an apoplectic fit, I swear. She stormed out after she was sure you and your teammate would be safe. Damn near destroyed the forest of death in the bloodbath that followed. Naruto paled. Tsunade had gone to fight that snake bastard alone. Is she alright? What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be helping her? Dan smirked. Me? Get between a fight Tsunade's having with Oro? I'm good, but I ain't that good. Besides, if I do, she'll complain about not getting enough exercise later. Naruto's mouth was hanging slightly open. You know, you could be a little more, I don't know, concerned maybe. He tried to kill me and my teammates. What makes you think he wouldn't do? Actually, he didn't. Dan interrupted with a lazy shrug. The drugs he pumped into you were a real nasty mix, but it wasn't anything lethal. You've been sitting here for 3 or 4 hours with Su-chan's seal letting it run its course faster. It dissolves into little more than water after it done a fair job of making you feel miserable and sick for a few days. The silver-haired man scratched his chin. Gotta give him points for creativity if nothing else. The blonde blinked. He didn't poison us. Dan shook his head. I know you've lost your memories, kiddo, but one thing you can count on is the fact that you're probably one of the only people that's actually safe from Oro. He held you when you were a baby, you know. I think you're the only kid besides Anko he might actually like. That's not very reassuring. The door opened, and Naruto was greeted to the sight of Tsunade, scratched, mud-covered, irritated Tsunade. She looked at Dan. Keep the count, 11 even. The white-haired man nodded. She looked back at Naruto, the hard glint vanishing from her eyes. Hey kiddo. She greeted, marching in, green hands already focusing with chakra. Nothing missing? She asked. Nah. He answered. I feel fine actually. How are Ryoko and Hachiba? Ryoko's still in her room. She answered. Sleeping it off. Hachiba was picked up by his parents an hour or so ago from what I'm told. They're both okay. And the snake? She smirked. What do you think? The next day Orochimaru was still cradling his skull with an ice pack, sitting in his home resting from Tsunade's wrath. Unlike her, he didn't have the luxury of just healing everything and moving along like a fiddle. He gave as good as he got in any non-lethal match, but with her it always had the rather distinct irritating factor of seeing her prancing around without a care for the odd broken bone or two after it was done. Meanwhile, he was here nursing a bruise the size of the village monument on his ribs and what felt like a cracked skull. Seeing as how the only medic he'd trust to come within 10 feet of him was the one that inflicted these injuries, he was stuck healing the old-fashioned way for the most part. Still, he'd managed to write up and file his report before her rampage had thundered along to find him, having sent it off via summoned snake to deliver it to the proper archivists. He'd have taken it himself if he hadn't made a point to avoid property damage. Tsunade certainly wouldn't have half the mind to avoid given her anger if they'd met in the village proper. And people said he wasn't considerate. There was a knock on his door, and he tried to sense if it was Tsunade, Sarutobi or Anko, his usual visitors. He couldn't tell. He blamed the cracked skull. "It's open," he called instead. The door slammed open, the knob cracking against the wall. "Tsunade, then. Back for round 2 already?" The voice that reached out to his consciousness was certainly not hers though, and the words made him want to choke this person. "Was this your idea the entire time?" He was sorely tempted to smother himself with the ice pack. "What?" he croaked out. "Nefarious, twisted little scheme have I concocted in my mind this time? Am I guilty of poisoning the village's water supply? Consuming the souls of newborn children? Lining the village's flower shops with an overabundance of fertilizer, creating giant green monstrosities that will consume us all? What else could I have done this week, my dear Zay, that I am greeted by such sweet accusations? You know damn well what you did." The little woman stormed into his home, removing her scarf and her coat to stave off the late November chill. She was little above eye level even with him sitting down. She threw down a piece of paper on the coffee table he was propping his feet on, pointing at it as though it was a condemned criminal. "You gave them a test they couldn't pass just so you could fail them and pass Naruto all on his own." Orochimaru made an effort to raise his head, glaring with a deadpan stare, all the fury of a sleep-deprived, pain sonin in his gaze. "They should have acted as ninja," he said simply. "Naruto was dead weight and they had to leave him." The girl stubbornly refused and the boy let himself be cowed. Neither one of them deserved to be genin of Konoha. Yes. How convenient. And if they would have left him, you'd be turning right around and saying that they should have been loyal to their teammate and tried to save him before abandoning him. She placed her hands on her hips, glaring at him with that ever-present purse of her lips that vaguely resembled a scowl. "Is mind reading one of your many talents, Zay? Oh please, I taught you for the first 4 years of your career and your reputation is hardly spotless. This stinks to high heaven." She scoffed, bringing her hands up to an, air quote, act as shinobi should have. "You love the word play in the games. You've always loved tricking people while telling them a half-truth or a whole truth. You practically get off on it." "Yes, well, it's not your decision to make. Sarutobi is the one that ultimately decides in." "Oh bollocks." She waved aside his statement. "He has to give deference to you because you were there, and even if he didn't have to do that he'd go along with it because more than anything else he needs strong ninja. Anko speaks for your results as is, so he wouldn't really object to you taking Naruto on as a private apprentice." He let his head fall back with a sigh through his nostrils. "Don't you seem to be getting awfully angry about tea?" "Damn right I am. They're my students and I'm not going to let you screw around with their futures. Futures that they've justly earned. Their only mistake here was getting assigned an up-jumped arrogant schmuck like you as their sensei with dreams of training the next god of ninja or whatever's going on in that head of yours." He rolled his eyes, taking a breath. "Is there a point to this shouting match?" "Yes, there is. You're not failing Ryoko." "Ryoko? Not the boy?" He left. She stated simply. "Another year at the academy will do good for his discipline. Ryoko did her very best and she deserves to pass. So you're passing her." "You're giving me orders." "No, I'm old, crazy and cranky, damn it, I get to give orders." He would argue that point, but then he recalled the Konoha leadership. Sarutobi, Homura, Kaharu, the daimyo, the Hyuga clan elders. Somehow he felt they might be a tad bit biased if he brought up the issue. She took a breath. "You know I'm right, and you know somewhere in that little head of yours, though God knows you'd stab yourself in the tongue before admitting it, that she did what was right. So you'll pass her," she said as though his protests were inconsequential and he'd already agreed. "Now why exactly do you look little better than roadkill? Was it Tsunade?" No, it was the other woman with a temper and enough strength in her finger to level a building. "She always did know how to give you a good kick to the head when you needed it." Zay chuckled, all crooked teeth and laugh lines. "HRMPH. I'll make you some chicken soup and you'll feel better," she said, sounding so much like the kindly little witch she pretended to be. "Then you'll write up a new report for the Hokage on your team." She patted him on the knee as she passed by, and Orochimaru only briefly wondered at the absurdity of anyone making him chicken soup. Let alone one doing so after they'd come in here with the proverbial rock in hand. He supposed stranger things had happened. "And what's all this mess here?" He heard her call from the kitchen. "I know you don't entertain guests, but that's no reason to be unkempt." He rolled his eyes. On second thought, being chastised for his cleaning habits by a god only knows how old academy instructor in his own home might be the oddest thing that had happened to him in his career. It was nearly 2 days later that found Naruto and Ryoko sitting in the Hokage's office, waiting for the old man to show up. "Hey," he greeted. "Hey yourself," she answered back. "Feeling better, princess?" Naruto's nose scrunched in distaste. "Princess? We had to carry your ass like one." "I was gonna go with damsel in distress, but that's just too long to say in conversation," she groused, not at all amused at the frustration and fear Naruto's 5-year-old constitution had brought her. Naruto was tempted to protest, but seeing as how she had, technically put her life at risk to save him, he was willing to let it go. "Sorry I wasn't more of a help," she shrugged. "Guess it wasn't your fault, the snake." The door opened, bringing their attention towards Sarutobi as the aged Hokage entered, a kindly smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Naruto-kun. Ryoko-chan." Ryoko stood and bowed awkwardly, utterly unused to the act. "Hokage-sama." "Hey old man." She gave him an odd look as Sarutobi ruffled his hair and patted her on the shoulder before walking by them to sit on his chair. He took off his hat, revealing his liver-spotted scalp. "Word is you two had an interesting exam. Your student's a whack job," Ryoko blurted out before she blushed, remembering who she was talking to. "That snake's bad news, old man," Naruto growled. Sarutobi looked sadly at the boy. To think he'd once been so very fond of the pale Sannin. "Yes, well." He leaned forward, lacing his fingers in front of his mouth in a way that reminded Naruto of his Tsunade. "The fact is you two passed your exam." Hachiba didn't. No one missed the cheerful gleam in her eyes when she asked. "No, Orochimaru has deemed him unfit to be a genin as of yet, given his panic." "I'm inclined to agree. But you two passed his exam, and that means you two, and whatever genin he chooses from the reserve roster will be his students." "You're leaving us with him?" Ryoko asked, incredulous. "His methods were unorthodox, and I realize you might have trouble working with him. So I'm offering you a choice of staying on or being relegated into the genin reserve list until another team can be found for you." "How long would we be on the reserves?" "Unknown. It depends on how badly sensei need a new teammate. Could be months, could be a few years, though that's rare. The average is a year or two, with the most fill-ins being due to the genin passing on to becoming chunin as opposed to the death of a squadmate." Naruto bit the inside of his cheek. Despite his record, no sensei in their right mind would take a 5-year-old to a chunin examination. Without the odd outlier or desperate team, he'd most likely be stuck on that reserve list until he was within a far more acceptable age. "You don't have any other available junin?" Sarutobi shook his head. "None really, and to be honest I suspect Orochimaru's involvement in that. When he wants something he plans its acquisition like a military campaign. And right now he wants this team. The only wild card he can't factor in is your respective acceptances of going on the reserve lists." Naruto seethed at the simple circumstance that he couldn't wait. Every day was one day less in the ever-shortening time span he had to prepare for Akatsuki, for Tobi. Even now that guy was going around the elemental nations laying the groundwork for everything he had lost. He couldn't sit around with his thumb up his ass. He had to get past being a genin, and he had to do it quick. If he had to do it while keeping one eye open for a snake behind his back, so be it. "I'm not going on the reserves," he announced resolutely. "I'll ask for a sensei transfer 6 months from now, but I'm not going on the reserves." Sarutobi raised an eyebrow, curious, but he didn't press for information as he turned to Ryoko. "And you, Ryoko-chan?" The gray-haired girl frowned, almost scowled, glaring at Naruto before turning back to him. "I ain't quitting either." He had a distinct impression that it was more a competitive nature than good judgment at work there. "Still. Very well. Then you are officially Team 8 under the guide of Junin Orochimaru. Report to Training Ground 17 tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I'll send word to your sensei of your acceptance later today." And just like that, their genin life was officially underway. Naruto really didn't want to say what was becoming rather apparent. He really didn't. So he just settled for saying that studying under Orochimaru was not what he'd been expecting, and he'd been expecting quite a few things. He was. In comparison to the other teachers he'd had beforehand. He was not going to give the man a compliment, he was. He would settle on a perfectionist and demanded such in both his students' ability to learn and his ability to teach. In short, he wouldn't let up until you could do whatever it was he was asking you to do. Jiraiya and Kakashi were very hands-off teachers. The only teacher he had that Orochimaru somewhat resembled in methodology was B. The former two would give you a concept, and throw you to the proverbial wolves to figure it out. Learning by doing and such. B had guided him along to learn how to be in harmony with Kurama. Though, he wondered half the time if the circumstances were what kept him so attentive as opposed to his own teaching practices. B seemed like he would have preferred to be writing up a song or something as opposed to lecturing. Orochimaru, though, was attentive to everything. The first thing he'd done with them was have them fight him. No ninjutsu or genjutsu allowed, just pure taijutsu. They hadn't touched him, of course, that wasn't the purpose. They fought him in hand to hand for several hours, with the snake occasionally pulling off some strange maneuver Naruto never even dreamed of to attack, or forcing them to break away from standard academy taijutsu. As he was fighting them, Orochimaru broke down absolutely every aspect of their physical makeup, fighting preferences. Every tell that they had, how they leaned, where they looked, what they tried to do by instinct, whether it was block, dodge or counter, he catalogued and then informed them of what he'd seen later, when they'd been eating their lunch. The first thing I'll do with you two is teach you both a new taijutsu style. The academy basics are a one-size-fits-all form that is there out of necessity. Now that you are my soldiers, it is my job to hone you into the weapons you will one day become. And the first step is learning how to win at a simple fist fight. Ryoko had questioned him on such. Everyone knew that out of the two remaining Sannin, Orochimaru was by far the most well-versed in the arts of ninjutsu. A ninja's life is measured in the chakra he has. For most, this means that once they've run out of this precious resource, they might as well be dead. Even a shinobi several times weaker, or even a simple samurai, could end their lives with little more than a knife. Before I teach either of you how to spend your own share of this precious resource, I will first teach you to turn the knife against that weaker shinobi. How to defend yourself and ultimately kill whatever wishes to turn you into prey with your bare hands. As my soldiers, you are reflections of myself. And I will not be found wanting by having one of you die to a simple brigand with a good sword arm. The very next day, he brought them both scrolls for stretches and exercises that had to be completed every morning before training, and every week he would test them to see how well they could pull their respective exercises off. If they failed, well, let's just say they didn't exactly want a repeat performance and leave it at that. Training consisted of drills. Every day, over and over, they would do a variety of physical exercises, from running to push-ups to crunches and so on, followed by the early Ks of their taijutsu styles, with one Orochi leading Ryoko and the other helping Naruto. Ryoko's style, from what Naruto could gather, was fast. Using quick hand strikes, ones that could easily incorporate kunai or shuriken held in the hands, and flexibility to avoid or absorb attacks, as opposed to a more meat and potatoes blocking punching. He vaguely wondered if it was the so-called snake style, and that she'd learn to eventually seize openings and exploit pressure points and such. With him, however, it would still be a great number of years before he was anywhere near a physical capacity to go pound for pound with a full-grown civilian, let alone a shinobi. So his style was focused on kicks and knives. The leg, of course, being far larger than the fist, also carried the most amount of power and reach, something he sorely lacked. The only thing he was using his hands for was the occasional block and the acrobatic dodge. The entire style revolved around quick footwork and powerful chakra-enhanced blows. The knives came into play when he grappled. Given his small size, it wasn't out of the question for him to nimbly latch onto a whole limb, be it a leg or an arm. Where most fighters could take these limbs and break them through sheer brute power, he could just latch onto them like a gnat and keep cutting till he disabled the limb, or hit something vital. And given the amount of veins and arteries present in the hips, legs, arms and biceps, killing a man who overextended his punch wouldn't take very long. He kept on insisting ninjutsu would level the playing field even further, but the snake was flatly refusing, even sabotaging his and Ryoko's own efforts to go to the Konoha library and find some stuff for themselves. Somehow he'd gotten Gigi to sign an order for the employees to not let either of them into the shinobi sections of the library. He didn't even know such an order existed, so, in that aspect at least, he could take some petty satisfaction at calling the Sannin a prick in this regard. Still didn't change the fact that he was cut off from any easy ninjutsu sources. He would practice some of his own techniques privately if he ever had a private moment, where Kakashi-sensei was no longer watching him during days because he was training with the snake, and Chan still watched him at night. While he kinda liked the faceless woman, she was really killing any opportunity he might have had to be discreet. Hey! The blonde looked up, finding the gray-haired Ryoko standing at the road ahead. Oh hey! He greeted with a smile. You're up earlier than usual. She shrugged. Or you just slept in later than usual? Come on, let's walk. They made their way down the road, the early morning cold finally dissipating to make way for the sun's warmth. So, he ventured by way of conversation. When do you think we'll get a mission? It's almost been 2 months. D-ranks sucked, but at least now, knowing what to expect, he could take some vindictive pleasure in watching Ryoko's reaction to the news that their missions would be little more than chores people were too lazy to do themselves. Dunno. When he's happy with our taijutsu, I guess. She answered, lacing her hands back behind her head as she strolled along. It sucks that he's not teaching us any ninjutsu though. I mean, what kind of ninja can you be with just the academy stuff under your belt? I know this Uchiha kid. Younger than me by a year and he can already spit fireballs. I want to burn annoying people too. She seemed to smile in delight at the prospect. Naruto's sweat dropped a bit at that. When they arrived, Orochimaru, as usual, was already there waiting for them. It was with some surprise though that they took notice of someone else. Naruto, Ryoko, he said by way of greeting, not even lifting his eyes from the paper scroll he was unfurling in one hand and refurling in the other as he read it. Meet your new teammate, Kyofu. She was a tall girl, older than both of them easy. Dark purple hair that trailed down towards her lower back in a straight cascade. Mocha skin deigned some ancestry from Kumogakure. It was a stark contrast to Ryoko's silver-gray, Anko-like style. Naruto would say she was, if not 15 then very close to it. Now his lack of age was even more apparent, as was his rather obvious height challenge. He could barely even reach Kyofu's stomach right now. It was stupid to be irritated at that, given that he graduated at barely 6, but there it was. Still he decided to try breaking the ice a bit. Hi there, he said with a little forced cheer as he extended his hand. She smiled politely taking his hand, though the hesitation was evident. Uzumaki-san, I presume? I heard you were young but… Your introductions can be done later. Orochimaru interrupted neutrally, rolling the scroll closed and tying both rolls together with a rope. Today we'll begin your chakra control training. You're one step closer to the lauded field ninjutsu with this. Why can't you just give us something? Ryoko complained. The other teams have already learned. I don't care what the other teams have learned or not learned. The pale man interrupted. You are a team. He stressed. You will learn at the same pace and will function entirely as a team. As a single entity, not three. Your skills must be to par with each other to cover the weaknesses of each other. He paused for a moment, either to gather his thoughts or to allow his words a moment to sink in. You are genin. As such you are expected to work with others because your weaknesses are evident and substantial, and will continue to be such well into the rank of Chunin, where you will still perform the function as a piece of a greater fighting body. Only when you become Junin, will you be trusted to complete objectives alone. And even then you will function as a leader, not an independent entity. The same is true of even the Anbu Corps. Only Hunter Nin can work solo. Naruto muttered to himself, but in the empty clearing he was heard easily by the others, with Ryoko and Kyofu throwing a quick look his way at the sound of his voice before returning their eyes to Orochimaru. And you are all a far cry from being Hunter Nin. He finished. Now if there are no further complaints, we will begin our exercises. So how long have you been a genin? Ryoko asked as they sat in a semicircle. About 3 or 4 hours later they were eating some toilet paper tasting rations. Dry as bone meal with some lukewarm water. It didn't take Naruto long to get used to them again. She still made a face though, and Kyofu had seemed as surprised as either of them had been before. She too scrunched up her face like she'd just been punched in the throat. The raven-haired girl coughed, drinking greedily to wet her dry as sandpaper throat. 3 years now. My teammates managed to pass our second try for the Chunin exams. I was injured and couldn't keep going halfway through the test. Clearly it hurt her pride to admit as much. When are the next exams? Naruto cut in, his voice eager, a strange glint in his eye. A serpentine gaze took note of that detail. In about 5 more months if I'm not mistaken, she answered with a shrug. I've been on the reserves list for about a year so I haven't been following. 10 minutes. Oro called out, warning them of the impending end of the break and the fact that they would soon have to get ready to continue their exercises. As tasteless as the damn tings were, Naruto and Ryoko had learned quick enough to scarf them down before time was up. Luckily Kyofu followed their example. It was approaching sunset when Orochimaru let them go. The evening sky lit up with the flares of orange and purples as the sun dipped below the horizon. That was pretty intense. Their latest addition groused, wincing a bit with each step. We get to do it again tomorrow. Ryoko hissed, rubbing her stomach where her abs were currently making their displeasure known. Getting the concept of tree walking down had largely lost its luster when the Sannin demanded they each do a set of 30 crunches while hanging upside down from the tree. Their feet to the branches and heads to the ground. The pain had largely fractured her delicate knowledge of chakra control. Naruto and Kyofu had managed to hold themselves up though, much to her irritation. Naruto nodded. With 5 months left before the next exams, it was likely that they would get to ninjutsu by then, which was a serious supplement he needed to his punching power no matter what taijutsu style Orochimaru was trying to drill into. He paused, his heightened senses of the diluted nature chakra rushing through his coils, going off like a flare in his thoughts. There was a very familiar presence just a little ways off to the side. He grinned like a Cheshire cat. I'll see you guys in a bit, he said quickly before swiftly swiveling around on his heel to head down a different road. What was that about? Kyofu questioned with a raised eyebrow. Ryoko shrugged. How should I know? Naruto meanwhile, very nearly seemed to slither between the people of the late evening, coiling through them like a bloodhound on a mission as he honed in on the presence that had caught his attention. He walked up to a raven-haired woman wearing a red and black hakama and haori, examining a piece of fruit on the market stand. He smiled as he walked up behind her. And Chan, he cried exuberantly, as loud and high-pitched as his 6-year-old voice allowed. The woman seemed to straighten before slowly turning around, one eyebrow hooked high on her forehead. Naruto-kun, she said, onyx black eyes showing little surprise outside of the initial stiffening of her shoulders. Naruto grinned in response, quickly coming to 3 conclusions. 1. She was young. Well, younger than he thought she'd be. In fact, he'd say she may just be at Kyofu's age. Though she was an inch or two taller, which with the mask and voice muffling had probably attributed for her to seem like she was already in her 20s or so. 2. You're pretty, he exclaimed, as blunt and truthful now as he'd always been. The eyebrow arched up just a little further and a seldom-seen smirk graced her features. Thank you, she said with just the slightest inflection in her tone to note her approval of the compliment. Perhaps someday I'll say the same to you. Naruto smiled, happy at that he'd gotten her to joke, even if it was a little at his expense. And Chan was just so serious all the time. And 3, she was definitely familiar, he had seen her before. But for the life of him he just couldn't recall where. It was infuriating, like something just on the tip of your tongue or the edge of thought. She hadn't been an enemy, he knew that much. He could remember all the enemies, especially those he'd had to put down more than once. So who in the hell was Shish? Ne-san? Another voice cried out and Naruto turned to look only to freeze in place. Running towards them was a mini Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto's eyes darted from his one-time friend and rival onto Chan, and back, his mind quickly forming conclusions that just as rapidly felt as though they were crashing into sudden brick walls, grinding every thought to a blindingly fast halt. No way. Uto, she said, kneeling down to be at eye level with her, now confirmed younger brother as he came in close. He could almost hear the crashing sound every upper cognitive function made when Sasuke stood in front of her, holding out a kunai pouch. Itachi-ne, can we get these? The little Sasuke asked, smiling as Itachi took the pouch in her hand. We can, she assured before handing it to him. But first you have to give it back. Technically, you just stole old man Ichisu's merchandise. Uto. She chided, jerking her head to indicate a somewhat irritated-looking stall clerk. Sasuke blushed, nodding. Before he left though he looked behind her. Who's he? Itachi turned as she spoke. This is, she paused at the sight of him. Naruto was an expressive child. But, as expressive as he was, one of the things she'd yet to see on his face was terror. It was plain as day to see on his face now. He was pale as a ghost, his pupils had narrowed down into pinpricks. She caught twitches in his fingers. Twitches that she could almost suspect to be quick-draw motions. A reflex. But that shouldn't be possible at his age. Uzumaki Naruto, she finished, standing up to her full height and keeping her eyes on the boy. Before she could fully gather her thoughts, Sasuke, normally a reserved child, stepped forward, oblivious to the myriad of emotions playing behind Naruto's eyes. Hi. Uchiha Sasuke. He extended his hand. Naruto seemed to snap out of whatever dazed stupor he found himself in fast enough to plaster on a brittle glass smile as he extended his hand to shake Sasuke's. Uzumaki Naruto. Future Hokage, he announced loudly. Hokage? He's never expressed an interest in such a thing before. She saw Sasuke opening his mouth to speak when she clamped her hand down on his shoulder, bringing his attention up to her. Go. She demanded gently, a subtle genjutsu layered into her words to make him more compliant. I'll get you the kunai in a bit. But give them back before Ichisu calls the police nin on you. He nodded. See ya later then, Naruto-san, he called as he walked away. She was startled when Naruto immediately turned to leave as though there was a lash at his back. She grabbed at his arm. And when he turned, there was no mistake in her eyes and she saw his fingers reach for a kunai pouch that was not there and his hand strike with empty fingers at what would have been the artery along her left inner bicep. There was no wild flailing, no wasted movements had that hand been armed, and had she been anyone else he would have cut her and made an escape before anyone was the wiser. That was an assassin's strike. She gripped his arm harder, now holding him still. With quick, subtle trickery, she ensnared those within the vicinity in an illusion, forming a clone to take her place as she vanished with her nighttime charge. Whomever was nosy enough to keep watching believing that she had just sent Naruto off and turned to buy the goods with her sibling. In reality, she appeared 2 blocks away, on one of the higher rooftops for some semblance of privacy as she let Naruto, who'd been tugging against her, go. The frightened genin looked around, beginning to hyperventilate as his movements became slightly erratic. Naruto. Naruto, she called twice as he didn't respond to the first. Can you hear me? Do you know where you are? Aye. Where? He pants, his breathing is wild, the blood thunders through his temples, drowning out the sound as his heart pounds and pounds and pounds like it's about to burst in his chest. We're in the marshes of Kusa. It's a skirmish. Wait, was it? Yes. I'm fighting in the rearguard, a fighting retreat. Sakura is up ahead, leading the wounded. She is right. Or is she dead already? No. No, she dies. Later. Sasuke's with me, or is it B? I can't remember. We're fighting what was once the Shodem Tsuchikage's elite bodyguard Anbu. We're fighting back to back. But the mud is slick. Sasuke falls. Or was it B? I go to pick him up, he gives me his hand. Someone grabs my arm. I turn, bury the kunai into the artery with an explosive note. It goes off, takes the arm with it. It doesn't hurt me, Kurama helps with that, and then we're in Konoha and Chan. He answers, smiling. I can see Gigi's face, he points. Her eyes narrow, leery. What happened down there? Down where? His eyes are still erratic. His heart is hammering beneath his breast so hard it hurts. But he's perfected this mask. An old well-worn friend, you could say. She's not fully buying it though. What she'd seen couldn't just be wiped away. Did you remember something? Or think you remembered something? There is screaming. And blood. I remember that. The smell most of all. The sting of iron will never. Maybe. He scrunches up his nose. What are we doing up here? Weren't we in the market with your little brother? Yes, we were. She nods. What's the last thing you remember? Sasuke's his name. He smiled. I remember Sasuke's his name. A smile made of brittle, cracking glass. Naruto's always been a very expressive boy. She finds it unnerving then. That she can't read him right now. Thanks for watching.